Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm going to start a new series, What If Deku Had the Infinity Quirk Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Inko Midoriya was not a very admirable individual. Although she would never consider herself a great hero, she was unquestionably a great mother who always tried to be the most dependable source of love, support, and care for her beloved little Izuku. She was worried about Izuku's well-being when she learned earlier today that her little bundle of joy was quirkless. Earlier that day, Izuku was diagnosed as quirkless. Because she had been a late bloomer and because of the circumstances surrounding her quirk, she had doubts about the diagnosis. She also thought it was absurd that the existence of a toe joint would be used to determine someone's potential quirk status. In any case, her son was devastated, and the journey home was incredibly depressing. Inko allowed Izuku the space he required after he went to his room. She went to check on him in his room after a short while, and the sight made her heart tighten. Izuku was literally grinning as he watched his favorite video of All Might, his hero, saving dozens of civilians from a burning building. Her son was unaware that the smile was phony, but she knew from experience that it was. All he saw was the unshakable assurance of an unstoppable, unrelenting exemplar. Inko, however, saw a god among men who had established a heroic ideal that, to be honest, no one could match. No, she would never consider that again. She had to be there for her son because he needed her. As he heard her enter, he turned to face her, his eyes threatening to well up with tears. "Can I be a hero, too?" he said, gesturing to All Might on the computer screen in a tone far too depressing for any child. How would she explain to her son that she was unable to provide for him? How was she going to tell her son that she no longer thought he could, not because he was a strange kid, but because she no longer thought heroics were possible? How could she articulate that heroes are nothing more than diamond-encrusted rotten eggs? Having witnessed the worst that heroics had to offer, how could she tell him that she didn't want him to be a hero? How could she explain to him that being a hero is just a glamorous profession run by a group of ardent fools? She sighed as she turned to face him. She would either look back on this choice with regret or with fondness, but whatever, it was now or never. She hurried over to her son and embraced him, whispering to him in a low voice as she ran her hand through his wild, soft curls, which she adored. She gently said, "Izuku, look at me," and when he obeyed, she used her thumb to wipe the tears from his face. "You are a courageous, kind, and brilliant boy with a heart for helping everyone in need. I truly believe that you could become a hero." Izuku gave her a suspicious yet hopeful look. He appeared to be genuinely interested in believing her, but something was preventing him from doing so. "There's a but to this, isn't there?" and he discovered the solution. To be honest, she both detested and admired Izuku's unusually high level of intelligence at the age of 4. She would not be the first or last to comment on the fact that he was smarter than most children his age. She also knew that he inherited her enhanced perception, which was beyond what a 4-year-old child should have. She vaguely recalled that her biological mother had the same abilities as her, but she had concealed them under the guise of float. She was aware that her true quirk was genetic and only appeared in specific situations, which further raised her doubts about Izuku's quirkless status. She noticed that thinking about quirk science was giving her headaches. Perhaps when she has more time, she will do more research on the topic. She snapped out of her rambling thoughts when she felt Izuku's hand gently prod her cheek. Knowing that she had lost her train of thought, she grimaced sheepishly. If nothing else, it was better than her husband Hisashi, who had a habit of muttering his thoughts aloud. Her son was looking at her with more patience than any child of his age should have, she realized as she looked up. She picked him up and carried him out of his room while grinning at him. Izuku, who was perplexed, remained silent as she carried him to her room and sat him down. After settling him on her bed, Inko proceeded to her closet. Thinking twice about carrying out her plan, she hesitated as she reached for the door. She was unable to change her mind. She was going to see this through to the end. She pushed forward, pushed open the door of her closet, pushed aside the hanging clothes, then reached for the wall behind them and pushed on a hidden panel. She moved aside to show Izuku an old hero costume hanging in the area where the wall had been, and then part of the wall collapsed, revealing another compartment inside. It was a respirator mask, red combat boots, a light green spandex suit with white lines on either side, and full white gauntlets that reached the suit's forearms. Her son was staring at the costume with a mixture of amazement and disbelief when she turned to face him. When he finally looked at her, she gave him a sorrowful smile. "You're a pro hero? But I've never seen you go on patrol. Are you an underground hero? How do you fight criminals?" You have such a fantastic quirk, so I suppose it does make sense. Even if you couldn't move people with your quirk, you could easily attract and manipulate small, heavy objects around to direct them in combat or rescue operations. Izu, breathe, she said, her smile more sincere. She sat down on the bed beside him and prepared herself for the conversation she never wanted to have after he stopped his muttering tirade. To answer your questions, I was a pro-hero. I was underground, so I wasn't very well liked by the public, but I established a respectable reputation in underground circles. I'll also share with you a secret that has been passed down through generations. Space manipulation, not an attraction to small objects, is my quirk. Whoa, your quirk is even more awesome. You could wait. Why did you keep your actual quirk a secret from everyone? She inhaled deeply, then opened her eyes and took off the contact lenses she had been wearing over them, revealing vivid green eyes that gleamed like emerald stones. Well, she said. Izuku, she said, her voice solemn and devoid of the maternal love it usually possessed. There was a time when a strong villain who had the ability to steal quirks had been pursuing my lineage for years, and yes, my quirk is genetic, so it was probably passed down to you, which is why I'm not sure you're quirkless. I am demonstrating and explaining all of this to address your previous, question. I genuinely think you have the potential to become a hero. But I don't think you can become a hero like All Might. Before they turned into a ferocious plea, she could see the anguish and hurt in his eyes. But All Might is the greatest hero. She started by saying, that's mostly true, and that's a contributing factor. Among men, All Might is akin to a god. Since most people aren't as ridiculously strong as he is, they might not be able to meet the flawless standard he sets for heroes everywhere. So far, are you following along? All Might can do things that most heroes could only dream of doing, and that's even with quirks of their own, she added, acknowledging his nod. You don't currently have one of your own, which will make it much more difficult for you to become a hero. To catch up to them, you will need to put in at least twice as much effort as everyone else, and even then, you might only get half the credit for the job. Inko was not going to act as though Izuku would not be discriminated against because he was quirkless. It was better for him to know now than to learn later in a less flattering way. After checking to make sure he was still paying attention, she continued, saying, Izuku, it won't be an easy task. Training and preparation for this will require a significant amount of your time and energy, both mentally and physically. Additionally, even with a quirk, there is no real assurance that it will work out. There's the problem in the room that you don't have a quirk right now, and while that might seem like a death sentence, it's not in the big picture, she sighed. Heroes without combat-applicable quirks must overcome this restriction in order to compete with other heroes who possess them and villains who possess strong and dangerous quirks. You'll need to be able to defend yourself, fight off any possible adversary, be ready for anything, and know when to back off and ask for assistance. Luckily for you, your mother happens to be a retired pro living with you in your home and will happily train you to be the first and best quirkless goddamn hero this city has ever seen. As she saw Izuku's hope return and the light in his eyes brighten in real time, she knew she had made the right choice. Are you prepared for the enormous amount of effort required to achieve hero status, whether or not you have a quirk? It's okay to say no, honey, she said, her tone deadly serious, before bending down to look him in the eye. I promise to always love you and support you through everything, no matter what you do, what you choose, or what route you choose. You always have my undivided support. At the declaration, Izuku started crying again, but this time, the tears were not pained ones. Inko saw a steely determination form from the hope in those watery eyes of his, and she had all the answers she needed. She knew she would soon have to test his resolve, but for now, she knew she had made the right choice. The words, "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. "Of course, my little Izu," she replied, feeling him freeze in her arms for a second before he withdrew to stare at her inquisitively. "But, Mom, you mentioned that I don't have a quirk at the moment, as though that might change. Do you believe that will soon change?" "Well, it's possible that you're a late bloomer like me or that you have a quirk that's more latent than other quirks. I'm sure you've noticed that you're considerably smarter than everyone around you at your preschool. And your situation isn't hopeless because I didn't manifest my quirk till I was 6 years old." If his suspicious inability to meet her eyes in embarrassment was any indication, he had noticed. "The other kids just call me weird. I notice that I sometimes make the adults uncomfortable when I'm around them. I just figured I was ahead because I knew how to use the computer and internet early. Anyway," she said, "I'll have to do a bit more research on quirk science and investigate some things in our family before I can give you a definitive answer. For now, I'll handle your training without any quirks in mind." He said, "Okay, Mom," and then his eyes brightened once more. "Why did you retire, anyway?" That question was to be expected. She should have known better, but she tried to ignore the fact that she no longer performed hero work and quickly implanted the idea of her training him in his mind so that he would concentrate on the training rather than the other details. Unfortunately, her son would not simply overlook such details. As part of his training, she would make sure to immerse him in the fields of investigation and informatics. Her expression was grim. "Another time, sweetie," she said. "How about I make you some katsudon to celebrate the start of your training?" Izuku gave her a narrowed look, but he took the bribe to put the topic out of his mind, for the time being, anyway. But she was aware that she wouldn't get away with it so easily. She would wait as long as she could until he was old enough to deal with it, but eventually she would have to tell him everything. She would, for the time being, sharpen him into a blade prepared to handle the most perilous aspects of heroics, the hero, and the villain. Although the exact start date is unknown, some people believe it was almost 2 centuries ago. The day that the world was shocked to learn that a mysterious, glowing baby had been born in a Chinese city. After the news spread around the globe, scientists and researchers from all over the world started looking into this strange phenomenon that had just appeared. Following a number of tests on the baby's samples, researchers discovered an odd DNA strand that had been a part of the infant's cellular makeup. After more investigation, researchers were able to determine that the DNA strand was the cause of this phenomenon's genesis. Soon after, a number of stories about people developing strange powers started to make the news and were continuously being reported from all over the world. People were able to telepathically move objects, make ice blocks to cover their hands, and perform other strange feats. As scientists dug deeper into this novel phenomenon, it became clear that each of these individuals possessed a distinct strand that was identified as the source of all these strange abilities. However, extraordinary things became commonplace over time. Additionally, these new skills were dubbed peculiarities. Yet these skills paved the way for more recent opportunities. Dreams came to pass. Movies soon became a reality. The law and order imposed by the governments of the world started to crumble with the rise of quirks. The number of criminals who were referred to as villains suddenly increased. Governments everywhere made the decision to create their own group of people in order to address this new threat. A team that would fight these bad guys to keep the peace and order. A team that would strive to provide justice to everyone who had been harmed. A team of heroes. Numerous individuals who were regarded as the pinnacle of the hero society arose from that group. The symbol of peace was one individual who stood out among the rest, though it turned out to be All Might. However, this is not his tale, it's Izuku Midoriya's story. Izuku was only in pain. Over the months, he had grown most accustomed to the pain. Izuku's mother had, without a doubt, been beating the living daylights out of him 5 days a week for more than a year. He had received brutal physical training in combat, cardio, stealth, weight training, a little gymnastics, and even parkour for those inevitable times when it would be needed. And every minute of it was both loved and hated by Izuku. Izuku began with comparatively easy exercises at the age of 4, dodge training. Inko secured a small training room in the city and an alarming quantity of tiny rubber balls by calling in a favor that an old acquaintance from her professional days owed her. Izuku's goal was straightforward. Avoid the incoming missiles that his mother would hurl at him while grinning eerily. It appeared straightforward enough until he discovered that his mother had the arm of a major league pitcher and perfect aim, even when she closed her eyes. She also had him dodge while wearing a blindfold, which made matters worse. She kept from him the fact that he would also have to avoid her yoinking the balls behind him back into her grasp with her quirk. It also served as situational awareness training. Izuku, who was only 5 years old at the time, experienced firsthand an unpleasant situation and what it meant to be quirkless despite his doubts about the veracity of his status. 2 separate incidents that occurred on the same day and one of which was more pleasant than the other served as the example for this lesson. The first incident started with Izuku having a typical day at school. That is, if normal meant jumping in front of Katsuki Bakugo, his sort of friend, before the explosive blonde could finish torturing another boy who was cowering on the ground. Izuku would have preferred to think that it didn't happen often, but... The ash blonde glared at him, her eyes more annoyed than angry. "The hell are you doing, Deku?" she said. "You can't just beat people down like this, Kachan," Izuku said, a hint of frustration showing in his voice. "You've made your point already, whatever point that even was, to begin with." Izuku thought that might not have been the appropriate thing to say. "Oh," Bakugo snarled in a menacingly low voice. "You believe you're superior to me? You strange Deku, what the devil can you do about it?" Izuku didn't want this to end violently, but he knew it was inevitable. Looking around, he saw that they were starting to draw other students, and he saw a teacher come over to see what the commotion was about. By that time, the cowering kid had long since fled while Bakugo and company were preoccupied, so the teacher saw nothing but Bakugo and two other people encircling the unnerving child without a quirk, so he did what any other responsible adult would do in that circumstance. He walked away after turning around. Izuku frowned deadpanly and thought, that's gotta be illegal, right? He didn't think much about it, though, because he had a more urgent problem to deal with. A vengeful Bakugo and his two lackeys were approaching him. He didn't want to fight them, but it seemed inevitable, and all he could hope was that his mother wouldn't be too upset with him. The conviction with which he stated, "If I have to stop you myself, then that's exactly what I'll do," surprised Bakugo a little. It's what a hero would do. Izuku discovered that was not the appropriate way to put it. "You pathetic, useless nerd. You're looking down on me? I guess I'll have to finally put you in your place and remind you of the goddamn pebble you are," Bakugo said, nearly yelling. "Kachan, I can't do that." The green-haired boy stood in front of Bakugo and said, "I can't let you bully him like that." The boy could sense Bakugo's angry demeanor but refused to back down. "Hello, Deku. Will you endure the beating for him?" With a smug air, one of the two lackeys who followed Bakugo around inquired. "Yes." The green-haired boy looked around and saw that most people were supporting him, saying, "Because that is what anyone would do." "Oi, you shitty nerd, are you still going on about being a hero?" snarled Bakugo. The spiky blonde. Tiny sparks began to fly out of his hands. If Izuku claimed that Bakugo didn't intimidate him, he would be lying. "Yes," he said. "My goal is to become a hero." "As if a quirkless nobody like you can become a hero," Bakugo said, laughing mockingly. The blonde then smirked as she looked at the greenette, saying, "Deku, look behind you. You've already fled with that boy you wanted to save." When Izuku looked back, he saw that the boy had indeed fled, and he turned to face Bakugo, who was grinning darkly at him. "Shitty Deku, perhaps you need a little reminder of where you are." Little explosions exploded in the blonde's hands, and he growled. It was nothing new to the green-haired boy, so he closed his eyes and braced himself for the assault. Since he was quirkless, the teachers would simply ignore Bakugo and his henchmen whenever they attempted to beat or bully him, as if the situation didn't bother them at all, as if Izuku wasn't their problem at all. This was, after all, what always happened. The little boy with the green hair watched as Bakugo charged at him, his palms igniting like tiny explosions, but Izuku managed to dodge and saw Bakugo floating in midair. Confused, he decided to risk getting burned in order to find out what the hell was going on, so he waited. And bided their time, and continued to wait. However, nothing occurred. He did not experience any pain. Had he become accustomed to pain? He was certain that he must have developed a pain tolerance of some sort as a result of all the training his mother had given him. "Deku, what the hell?" Izuku recoiled when he heard Bakugo yell in that manner. He watched as Bakugo glared at him as though attempting to burn him alive while kicking the air. "Why in the world am I unable to touch you?" Like a child having a tantrum, Bakugo threw explosions while shouting his question without moving. What?" Izuku mumbled, equally taken aback. As more explosions exploded in his hands, Bakugo gritted his teeth and ran toward Izuku, bringing his palm near Izuku's face. Bakugo had gone for Izuku's head, and Izuku was stunned. Was Bakugo attempting to murder him? For Izuku, time slowed down. For some reason, as Bakugo's hands approached, Izuku noticed that there was energy surrounding Bakugo's hand, expanding volatilely as though it were about to burst. His perception suddenly improved, and he suddenly became aware of everything and everything around him. In that brief period of time, he became aware of everything in the school, including the swing in the opposite direction of his vision and the bird perched on a distant tree. He had no idea what was going on, but he was aware that Bakugo would permanently scar his face if he did nothing. He got ready to dodge, but an odd thing happened. Bakugo released a tiny explosion strong enough to shatter a kid-sized rock as he approached Izuku's face. To Izuku's astonishment and Bakugo and his henchmen's complete dismay, however, the explosion halted just inches from Izuku's face and split in two directions. It appeared as though some kind of barrier had been put up in front of Izuku's face. Bakugo snarled viciously, saying, "What the hell, Deku? You bastard, just get down and take the thrashing." He attempted to send another explosion, this time aiming for Izuku's chest, but was unable to approach him. Even after letting the explosion go off, he discovered that it was still unable to reach him. Without any more introduction, Bakugo threw a right hook at Izuku, his fist crackling with little explosions from his quirk. Izuku, accepting his fate, sidestepped the punch and snapped a firm grip on the blonde's arm, flipping him over his hip and thudding Bakugo to the ground. It was a shock to Bakugo's system, and he was frozen, staring up at the boy above him, and he did not like what he saw. Deku, the supposedly helpless, weak nerd, had reversed his attack, and Deku could defend himself. Izuku, meanwhile, has sensed the world slowing down once more. Some grotesquely long fingers lunged for him at a crawling pace in his periphery, and by sidestepping again, he grabbed the boy's long fingers and used one of the strategies his mother had instilled in him. Ruthlessly attack joints if your opponent was stupid enough to leave them exposed. In addition, he felt a familiar heat that he had experienced during his training, but it also felt like twinges of it were spreading throughout his body. And that's exactly what he did, with a pop that made everyone in the vicinity cringe. The heat in his chest went away, but the rest of his body continued to feel the heat, so he turned to face the winged boy head on and swung his arm out to clothesline him and kill any momentum he had. However, he was still unable to rest because his last opponent was attempting to lunge at him from the opposite side. The portly boy with the fewest effective wings attempted to use the bare minimum of glides his quirk permitted to get the drop on Izuku. At any rate, that was the goal. With the follow-through of his swing, Izuku unintentionally threw the bigger boy into the crowd after the boy slammed into his arm like it was a wall. Indeed, that was a novel development. Bakugo was preoccupied with what he had witnessed, while Izuku was unable to stop wondering what had actually happened in the midst of the stunned and deathly quiet crowd. His eyes widened in shock for the third time that day as he gritted his teeth and looked up into Izuku's eyes. Because the green eyes he had grown so used to were not staring back at him. But instead he was met with a pair of green eyes that gleamed like emeralds, eyes that were different, eyes that seemed to pierce right through him, looking at his soul and judging him, eyes that had a certain glow that did not fit well with him. Izuku had a problem with his eyes, and Bakugo did not like it. Deku has been lying about having a fucking quirk. Bakugo was silently angry about the perceived injustice, but the teacher from earlier had returned to deal with the chaos, only to find a silent group of kids staring at Izuku with real-life fear and wonder. What have you done to these boys, Midoriya? A part of Izuku wanted to recoil and cower at the glare he was getting, but a larger part of him thought the man lacked the intimidating element that his mother possessed. The teacher accused the young green head with a stern glare right away, but the older man did not even give Izuku a chance to speak before he swiftly ignored him completely. He turned to a bystander and said, "I don't want to hear any of your lies. What did Midoriya do to those boys?" The brunette bystander, who had a strong chameleon mutation, appeared to be about to say something when one of his eyes landed on Izuku, and the chameleon boy unconsciously winced at the sight, no matter how harmless. He replied hastily, nothing, he did nothing." Unconvinced, the teacher arched an eyebrow. "Oh," he said, now looking out at the throng. "Did Midoriya truly do nothing?" "Yep, yeah, and I'm not a rat," were among the choruses that startled the teacher. Anyone standing up for the small, oddball, let alone a whole group of onlookers who had just witnessed a brawl, was highly unusual. He looked around for anything he could blame the boy for, knowing that he couldn't chastise him without evidence. His gaze fell on a student who was lying on the ground, gripping his fingers as though they were broken. He approached the boy and knelt next to him after a spiteful grin eventually appeared on his face. "Did Midoriya do this to you?" he inquired as tactfully as possible. Through the pain, the boy glanced up at the man for a moment, then his eyes strayed to the boy in question, who instantly clammed up. He stammered, "I fell," and then closed his mouth once more. Now the man was absolutely ecstatic. What the devil the boy had done to inspire such dread was beyond his comprehension. "Did the other kids make you feel afraid?" It certainly wasn't anything constructive or respectful. The man mentally noted that the faculty and possibly other parties needed to keep an eye on Midoriya. The boy of the hour reluctantly moved forward before he could go any farther down that thread. Before stopping in front of the child whose fingers he, as his mother would say, forcefully readjusted, Izuku endured the tired and terrified looks of the other kids as well as the angry glares from Bakugo and the teacher. Those in attendance were a little taken aback by the quirkless kid's obvious display of a quirk after he had easily defeated the class tough guy and his friends, even though the crowd of onlookers had assumed they could not have been more surprised by the day's events. While many others, like the wing boy, made mental notes to avoid messing with Midoriya again for fear of breaking their fingers, many others had simply chosen to leave the scene and go somewhere else to process everything. Bakugo's two friends fled to tend to their injuries and reflect on their decisions. Bakugo, however, had festered into a vicious glowering, his glare attempting to will the greenhead to melt. The fact that it was failing only made the blonde's glare more intense. As Izuku walked home from school, all he could do was sigh in a mix of resignation and frustration. Though he was worried about how it would impact his training, he was excited to share the news with his mother. Since his mother had explicitly excluded quirk usage from all of their combat and movement training, he assumed she would find a way to include his quirk in the stances and routines in a manner akin to her own fighting style. Naturally, he could still recall the moment his mother revealed her actual peculiarity to him. It's likely that the barrier was a result of space manipulation. At least he knew that whatever his quirk was, he could create barriers, and he was positive that the warmth he occasionally experienced during training had something to do with it, rather than just adrenaline. Deku. When he left the school, he felt a presence waiting there, and the presence followed him home. He would have been alarmed and would have chosen a different path if it weren't for the start of ash blonde in his surroundings every time he looked over. He paused and looked at the angry snarl his face had twisted into as he turned to face his sort of friend who had been pursuing him. With a sigh, he thought, this is probably about my quirk. Hi, Kak. Where the fuck do you get off looking down on me, huh? Bakugo's palms crackled violently as he interrupted Izuku. Grabbing Izuku's Gakuren by the scruff, he dragged the boy into a nearby alleyway and threw him roughly into it. Izuku stood and brushed himself off, wondering, looking down on you? He hadn't been demeaning Bakugo in any way. He didn't think less of the boy, especially not when compared to himself, even though he did think the boy was a jerk more times than he should have. Up until that afternoon, Bakugo was considered superior to Izuku in the eyes of society because he had a quirk while Izuku did not. Izuku knew that very well. Bakugo screamed again, interrupting Izuku's inner monologue. You've been hiding your shitty-ass quirk all this time to laugh at me behind my back, haven't you, you shitty fucking Deku? That was more hate speech than Bakugo had ever directed at anyone, and Izuku was baffled. Even so, where did it originate? You think you're so fucking cool that you have some shitty quirk to make that stupid barrier? You're a fucking pebble in my path to greatness, a worthless fucking scrub that needs to remember his goddamn place? You hear me, fucking Deku? Before they left, Izuku had started to suspect that the teacher had reached Bakugo. He was saying ridiculous things, and Izuku knew that if the conversation went on, nothing worthwhile would be discussed. Izuku dutifully said, sure, Kachan, I'll stay out of your way, before sweeping past Bakugo and heading home. He wanted to appease the irate blonde, and he wouldn't dare grovel or cower to his attempts at intimidation, even if it meant coming across as contemptuous. Unfortunately, Bakugo lost his already waning temper when he interpreted that as another slight against him from the boy who he felt was acting above his station to personally insult him. Grabbing Izuku roughly, he threw him farther into the alley before setting his palm on fire and blowing the boy back even farther. Bakugo was furious, and he would make sure Deku knew where he belonged in a way he would never forget. When Bakugo charged, Izuku, however, was not in the mood for this shit again, so he just ducked and grabbed Bakugo before slamming him against the wall. Somehow, in the darkness, his emerald eyes were eerily glowing. Bakugo has frozen in shock for the umpteenth time that day. Izuku slowly raised his right hand and pointed it at him, and all he could do was watch in alarm. His stomach dropped when he saw Izuku's fiercely emerald eyes narrow with disdain at him, and he was genuinely unsure if he would survive that alley. Bakugo clamped his eyes shut in a vice grip, waiting for the inevitable punches to wash over him, as a bright blue flash burst from Izuku's palm. However, they never did. He didn't open his eyes to check the situation until it was obvious that nothing would be happening, and he waited for at least 5 seconds for something to happen. Izuku was no longer there. The concrete where he had been standing had collapsed, leaving no trace of his presence. After catching his breath, Bakugo hurried out of the alley and headed straight for his house, shoving past the inquisitive extras who had come to look into the explosions. Izuku, meanwhile, was pleased with the recent advancement. His mom had been correct about his quirk all along, and now his arsenal and the type of training they could do together had a whole new dimension. When he finally reached his complex, he practically threw himself inside in his excitement as he ran up the stairs and reached for his front door. Mom, you were right, I have a quirk. Mom, you were right, I have a quirk. Izuku was so excited and unrestrained that he threw himself inside the house, but to his surprise, it was eerily quiet. When he didn't hear back, he turned to look around and noticed a paper on the table with a pizza box. He picked it up and read. Izuku, I apologize for not being at home at the moment. I received an urgent call from an old friend, but I hope to be home soon. In the event that I don't return home in time to prepare dinner, the pizza box will be there. P.S. Mom. Izuku sighed, exhausted from reliving the events of the day. He turned on the television and dropped the paper on the table, thinking that the news could wait until later. As she blew out her hot coffee, Inko sighed. She was growing irritated because the person seated across from her had not spoken. "Well, it's been a while. Why haven't you called me, Kana?" Across from her, the purple-haired woman replied, "Well, hero B business and all that." Her purple hair, eyebrows, casual hoodie jeans, and glasses made her look reasonably attractive. "I always took the time out to train you. I never gave excuses even while I was a hero. Seriously, how hard is it gonna be to pick up the phone and dial my number?" "I'm sorry," Kana said, her face displaying a worried and dejected expression. "Why are you afraid?" Inko asked, leaning closer to Kana's face. "Have I touched you? Have I harmed you in any way?" With a perplexed look on her face, Inko asked, her raised eyebrows even visible through her sunglasses. "Why, you have done me a lot of things." With a thoughtful expression on her face, Kana said. No, you didn't do anything to me. Stop stuttering, it's annoying." "Oh, okay. So what you call me for? And it better be something worth my time, but I can't even be that mad because I came here for good coffee and I got it," Inko said as she drank her coffee. "Well, I recommended you, and they offered me a job at UA. Damn it, Kana, get your mind straight." Inko looked at Kana and smiled as she said, her eyebrows raised. "They recommended me for a job." With a perplexed look, Inko questioned, "I heard you the first time, that's why I said, didn't you tell them about my retirement?" "Why, yes I did, but you're a better teacher than me. Sorry, but Limitless is retired now and she isn't coming back." "Well, look at it this way, if you come out of retirement, well, you don't even have to come out of retirement fully, you just have to come and teach some kids at UA." It was Inko's straightforward response, "I'll think about it." Then, Inko got to her feet as if she was ready to leave, but she was stopped in her tracks by a voice calling out to her. She turned back to respond, her face irritated. "What is it, Kana?" After fumbling with her purse, Kana took out a newspaper and tossed it to Inko, who picked it up and started reading. She finished reading it in less than a minute after pulling up her glasses. It was an article about the Commission's lack of knowledge about reforming long-held, unpopular ideas. "Anything of note?" "Potentially too many things of note." Inko scowled. "A terrorist call doesn't sound like something you'd contact me for." "It's about the Meta Liberation Army. They've been bolstering their ranks lately and have risen through the government to be branded with an S-rank status, but the Commission is not doing a thing because they believe that MLA's sympathizers are very large in numbers and taking it down will cause societal problems. From schools to public gatherings, the MLA's grip on Japan's populace grows day by day." "I thought the Meta Liberation Army was disbanded after the Meta Liberation War," replied Inko. "It did, and the bulk of their army which was rounded up was either imprisoned or killed officially, anyway, but many of the sentiments surrounding Quirk liberation in his biography remained in a portion of society. That portion has only grown and festered over the years. While not outright supporters of Destro, there are several factions that align themselves with the basic premise of the original Meta Liberation Army. For the moment, they're small pockets of pro-Quirk activists, small-time villains, and terrorists leading indoctrination campaigns to bolster their numbers. As I said, I'll look into it," Inko got up to go. "Please do, and we think your district is one of the indoctrination zones." Kana's direct statement once again caught Inko's attention. In the hopes that it would work, she had used her final trump card. "Why isn't the JSDF attacking them right now if the Meta Liberation Army still exists?" "Well, we don't even know if the Meta Liberation Army still exists. For all we know, it could be a group of small-time criminals or small-time crime groups that align themselves with the original premise of Destro and the Big Five. And the Meta Liberation Army, even if they exist, they have kept their existence pretty hidden, so we do not have definitive proof of their existence or even definitive proof against them, and even if the Meta Liberation Army still exists, attacking them will not only cause political problems but societal issues, so right now, even if they exist, we are stuck at tentative stalemate." Using an ancient code created by superheroes to communicate with one another, Kana pulled out her final card. "A supervillain assault. All Might is no longer operational, duration not specified." Inko nodded in comprehension as her eyes grew to the size of dinner plates. It simply could not have been that easy. She let out a breath and continued, "Anything else?" "No, not really," Inko asked. "By the way, what course would I be teaching?" "Well, you'd be teaching practical heroics," Kana remarked, her face displaying a look of longing. "I thought they employed All Might for that, so you do keep tabs on heroics after all," Kana remarked, grinning shitlessly. "Don't push it. Sorry, but All Might is a terrible teacher. The few times I've been there he acts like a stuttering loser, ha ha ha. Oh god, you should have seen it. So, All Might is bad at something too, huh? Upon seeing Kana's confused face she quickly corrected herself, not that I expected him to be good at everything. Inko got up and left her half-finished coffee, saying, as I said before, I'll look into it, see ya. After Inko left, Kana sighed deeply and then complained. I swear, I don't get paid enough for this shit. When he arrived home, Izuku was watching TV with bright eyes. When he noticed that she was not even giving her a chance, he threw himself at her and yelled, Mom, I got a quirk today. Her voice was a little scared as she asked, so Izuku, how are you feeling now? Exhausted, was Izuku's straightforward response. With an overly upbeat tone, she said, how did you unlock it anyway? Please, tell me all about it. He didn't want to tell her about Kachin, but his mother kept observing him curiously. Well, I was in school today and, he said. Don't bother to lie to me, Izuku. I know that the six eyes only manifest themselves when stress, trauma, or high levels of adrenaline are involved. So, what the heck could have happened to trigger it? Izuku didn't want to lie to her because he was a horrible liar and she was clearly not buying it. Ayua was in school and K Kachin. He looked up at his mother, who had a sneer on her face and her eyes closed, and said, I will tell you about it later, Mom. Izuku could only hope his mother was feeling upbeat because he knew Kachin was done for when he saw it. After that, she opened one eye and gave him a questioning look, but when he didn't respond, she came to her own conclusion. A little too calmly, she said, he was threatening you. Although he was aware of her history as an underground pro-hero and her brutality, particularly during training, the most recent information only served to confirm one thing to him. He was fucking scared of his mother. Sensing danger and knowing what his mother could do, Izuku told her everything that had happened that day. He told her about the first altercation with Bakugo, about his teacher's obvious bigotry, about Bakugo's pursuit of him and his suspicions that the teacher planned it, and about the activation of his quirk. He was deeply unsettled by the blankness of her face after he finished. He was perspiring because he could see a raging rage in her eyes that stood out against the deliberate silence. He prayed for a speedy death for anyone who was the object of her wrath, even though it may not have been a very heroic thought. As he pictured his mother visiting the Bakugo's home and tearing them apart with a menacing smile, Izuku went pale on the outside. Izuku was aware that his mother's smiles conveyed a range of emotions. Her mouth curving upward in a smile indicated that she was happy or paying attention. A smile with her eyes narrowed and her smile turning into a crazy smirk suggested that she was fighting or being frightening, but a smile with her mouth curved sideways or downwards suggested that she was unhappy or irritated. He would carry that with him to the afterlife, even though he had a covert chart for her smiles. Calling him a creep or a weirdo was the last thing he needed. Inko, on the other hand, considered her options carefully before choosing to call her longtime friend Mistuki. Oh, hello Inky, long time. So why did you decide to call today? You usually don't call during business hours. Must be important, or maybe you were just missing your old friend. Am I right in Inko? Please don't call me that name, and we spoke last week, Inko said sarcastically. That's a bit too long, don't ya think? Inko was forced to sigh. She was letting out too many sighs. Mitsuki. Did Katsuki tell you about what happened? The line paused, and Inko could sense Mitsuki's hesitation before answering. Have you noticed any changes in Katsuki? Changes like what? I don't know. Any changes at all. Katsuki's been talking about a new quiet but kick-ass girl in his class. Honestly, I think he may even have a. Not that kind of change, damn it. Then, what kind of changes are you talking about? Inko started to tell Mistuki about the MLA, but Mistuki chose to respond to her in a serious manner, saying, you know what, let me just drop the ball. I don't know what happened yesterday because he wouldn't tell me. The little brat has been quiet these past few days, more irritable than usual, and he spent all of his time in his room, refusing to leave, not even to eat. I believe I understand the cause of that. After a brief altercation, Izuku revealed his quirk to him, and a strong one. Wait, is that all? He's nursing his pride because the little shit is no longer top dog? Haha. It works for him. I hope this makes him a little more humble. Sighing into the phone, Inko said, yeah, it's like my quirk, but I wish that were the end of it. Has little Izu experienced any problems? Inko's voice hardened like iron. No, however, the school is a different matter. The line fell silent once more. You're bringing out the hero's voice, the person said. Oh my god, this has to be serious. She hurried on after hearing Mitsuki gasp, saying, Izuku told me that Katsuki tried to viciously assault him in an alleyway after detention. He thinks that one of the teachers specifically influenced Katsuki to do it, and I have reason to believe him. I'm so sorry, Inko. Oh my god, I was unaware of how bad it was. That odd remark was put away for later by Inko. Wait, what? Don't worry, Mitsuki. Everything is fine. Even though I wish it hadn't happened and it isn't, I don't hold Katsuki solely responsible. I'm calling primarily for that reason. The school system is tainted. What are you saying? In other words, I'm not sure how many adults have brought Katsuki home recently or come here to report the use of quirks illegally. Something fishy is going on here, in my opinion. It's a long story, but let's just say that a group of traditional quirk supremacists are attempting to gain a sizable following across the nation, and they have influence in many places, including school districts, to begin converting susceptible individuals. Among them is our school district. Holy SHT, am I even interested in learning how you obtained that knowledge? Does Limitless intend to come out of retirement? Mitsuki, don't push it. I apologize, but this sounds like very serious business. I know. Should the Limitless herself ever make a comeback? Once again, Inko sighed, saying, Mitsuki, we're getting off track here. All right. Must I relocate Katsuki to a different district? For now, that would be ideal. However, we have yet to determine the extent of this influence. Keep an eye out for anything suspicious, and I'll keep a listen for any new information. I doubt this district is the only one in the city that needs a purge. What are you planning to do for Izuku? Inko's long-suffering sigh only confirmed Mitsuki's smirk. I'll just tell him the school's under government probation or the principal is a pedo if he asks questions. Can't say. Better that I don't say. Hero business, and all that. So you're getting back into the game, huh? As I said, don't push it? Anyway, reluctantly, and only in an educator's capacity, but maybe yes. As she responded to Mitsuki's curiosity, I was offered a job by the principal of UA. Given current events and potential future events, it was for the best that I took it. Oh, before I forget, did you tell Mayuko since? Yano considering elite schools would be a target of MLA propaganda. I haven't told her yet, but I will do so later. Okay. In any case, when will you be visiting her? Well, I should come next week, but I've been busy. How is she, by the way? She's doing fine and she asked me to thank you for paying for her therapy sessions. There is absolutely no issue. Nobody would be killed by a few thousand yen. They soon experienced a much longer period of silence, and eventually the call was cut off. Izuku, in the meantime, was anxious about what his mother would do to anyone who had ever unintentionally harmed him. Mom. Why, you don't intend to use your purple blast to destroy Bakugo and then put him back together as a pig or something? He sincerely hoped that he had not condemned his sort of friend. Was that even relevant anymore, to such a terrible end? What do you think I am? The question caught Izuku off guard, and he thought it was way too quiet. To make matters worse, the wind was blowing, which added to the silence's tension, and Izuku was absolutely certain he had urinated on himself. That's not how I meant it. Izuku couldn't help but squawk out shyly, I'm just surprised you're not angry. Oh no, I'm upset, but I'm confident Katsuki won't bother you for some time. I can't put someone back together after I've taken them apart, and he finally learned his lesson. What I'm bothered about is the teacher who decided it wasn't a good idea to put my child in harm's way. Then her face changed into it, her training smile. Izuku realized then that his teacher was dead, and he began to cry as he thought about the funeral. Anyway, I got a job offer at UA as a practical heroics teacher. UA, the UA, I'm so glad for you, Mom, I haven't accepted it. But why? Sniff sniff. Izuku's face was filled with a beseeching expression as he gazed at his mother. Inko refused to be fooled and avoided looking at Izuku. Oh my god, she would not. Oh no, she did. Okay, I'll accept the position. Let me call the principal, please. I would like to talk to him about a few things. Yes. Izuku yelled and then leapt to his feet, only to discover that he was floating in midair. He attributed this to his quirk and floated down with his mother's help, assuming that it was his quirk at work because she didn't react. Nice. Can I now float? Mom, did you not mention that your mother was also capable of floating? Izuku asked as he examined himself. I'll explain it to you later. Yes, Izu, and she and I also had the same quirk, I think, his mother smiled in response. After giving it some serious thought, Inko made the decision to call her longtime friend and associate, the furry Nezu. One of the people Inko could clearly trust from her professional days was Nezu, a non-combatant pro who had frequently saved her life, either directly or indirectly. She picked up the phone once more and dialed the number of the small con artist. "Hello Nezu, long time," Inko said, avoiding too many pleasantries. "How long has it been? 7 or 8 years?" Over the phone, a voice told her, 7 years 6 months and 3 weeks. "Hello, Mrs. Midoriya, how nice is it to talk to you again, or shall you return to being Ms. Mikumo since your husband died a few years ago?" Over the phone, a voice chirped excitedly. "How did you know? It happened a few years ago and I don't remember telling you anything about it. In fact, you know what, forget about it, you are Nezu." "That I am. Cut the shit Nezu, I know you're behind this." "Oh my, what would make you think that, Ms. Mikumo? Just call me Inko." Was everything she said true? "Yes, unfortunately, I am creating a war council and gathering allies. We can't tell if our comrades are sympathizers to their cause, but better safe than sorry. I have allies infiltrating Deka City as we speak." "Deka," Inko attempted to remind her. "That's the weird city that people who live there sprout quirkist ideals, right? The tens of thousands of people there who tend not to move out to anywhere else." Inko went pale. There could be tens of thousands of isolated individuals residing in an MLA indoctrination camp, Nezu replied solemnly. "How about the fact that All Might is no longer in use?" Nezu replied solemnly, "That is not something we can discuss over the phone," but there was no room for inquiry in his voice. Changing topics, what would I be teaching and why didn't I know you were now the principal of UA? "It was a development that occurred during your absence from heroics," Nezu said. "It's my way of shaping future generations of heroes away from the Commission's influence, and, hopefully, to create fewer situations where fantastic heroes like yourself become too disillusioned with the ugly truth. And I'm planning on you teaching 2nd and 3rd year's practical hero course. Despite All Might being a terrible teacher, the 1st year's curriculum is easy enough for even All Might to teach, but the 2nd and 3rd years are more complex. Too complex for All Might to teach." "What makes you think I'm a good teacher? You trained Kana and she's a top 10 hero." "She told you, right? That little dipshit, I'll strangle her next time I see her." "Please don't. Anyway, for kids now to become heroes." Inko paused to collect her thoughts before answering Nezu, and her scowl lessened. "To do that, you'd have to clean up the ugly truth that's hidden away." Nezu joyfully replied, "Oh, don't worry, after the MLA, removing the Hero Commission is next on my list." Inko couldn't control the laugh that came out of her mouth. "Never change, rat. I also presume you will be pulling Izuku from his current school, given the knowledge that it is likely an MLA indoctrination center," he said. "Might I suggest in schools free of MLA influence?" "Sure, but I have one condition." "Well, name it." "My son can come train at UA, and I'll deal with Izuku personally," she said, flashing her training grin. Izuku, who had been eating pizza and listening to the conversation, paused to look at Inko, and what he saw sent a chill down his spine. He wondered then if he had erred in pressuring his mother to accept the job offer. Nezu called and said, "All right, Limitless, let me sincerely welcome you to our UA staff." "I suppose I have to get used to hearing that name again," Inko said, recoiling when her hero name was used. She turned to glare at her son in irritation at the faint sound of snickering. "What? No boundaries, really?" Izuku choked back laughter. "At the time, it was unique, and you have no room to poke fun, Mr. Small Might," Inko defended. "You said you wouldn't discuss it anymore, Mom." Inko bought herself a restaurant 2 years after Izuku's training started, and although it was small at first, it quickly expanded to become one of the largest Japanese-focused restaurants in the world. Inko became the thing she detested the most. A celebrity, but it didn't mean she detested her wealth. She bought an old, abandoned Japanese-themed house a few blocks from her previous residence and renovated it. It was a duplex with sliding doors, tatami floors, matte flooring, and wooden Ingawa verandas. She also started to participate in heroics once more, giving advice to Kana Sudasumi, also known as Lady Nagant. Overall, things were going well for years. When it came to the MLA, the Hero Commission had closed many schools, including Izuku's school, because of quirk discrimination and the promotion of terrorist ideas. It was easy to find evidence against these schools, including statements from suspicious parents like Mistuki and children, as well as the presence of MLA materials. The last school to be closed was an American-owned private school for the elite that was the last of the 12th district, by their count, across Japan that had been seized, and they were starting to realize how serious the situation had become. Once one school was taken down, several more unintentionally exposed themselves by going on high alert, and occasionally some teachers who weren't buying into the plot or suspected a conspiracy within the school sent in anonymous reports about their schools. Inko herself had infiltrated a few schools with Nezu's assistance. Inko had taken Izuku to an academy called Sume, a prestigious school for the elite under strict supervision from the government and heroes because of the high number of aspiring pro-heroes, rich kids, and relatives of prominent pro-heroes attending there. The former resulted in the revelation of many more indoctrination plots. The worst part was that the majority of schools that were questioned disclosed their affiliation with Quirk supremacist groups that were not directly connected to the MLA, meaning that the situation had not changed and the tentative stalemate remained in place, much to the dismay of Nezu and Inko. Izuku Midoriya, now 15 years old, had grown significantly over the past 10 years. He now had muscles, six-packs, and a much taller stature, standing 5'9" inches tall, thanks to his mother. He slammed his arms into the annoying alarm clock, pulled the blanket away from his face, and crawled out of the bed with a frustrated look on his face. He went to the bathroom as usual, brushed his teeth, showered, and went to the dining room for breakfast when he noticed his mother making breakfast while humming a strange song. It was another Saturday, which meant no school, no homework, and no training session with his mother, the bane of his life. "Good morning, mother," as usual, Izuku greeted with a smile. With a cheerful smile, his mother returned the greeting, "Good morning, Izu-chan." His mother was still preparing breakfast when she said, "Izuku, your UA entrance is coming up in a few months and I hope you're ready." Yeah, I'm ready for anything, although I still don't understand why you won't recommend me or tell me what the standard entrance is about. Come on, what fun would that provide? Additionally, you must be both intelligent and strong to pass if you want a clue." Izuku looked at his mother irritably but did not respond. "If you want to prepare, clean up Dagoba Beach with your quirk." "I don't know the place you're talking about. Dagoba Beach? Ask for directions. Before the UA entrance exam, I also want the beach to be cleaned." "Is that difficult?" Izuku smirked and asked. "Sure, take it as you will." Izuku walked to the train station and chose to take the shortcut he knew well in Musutafu because, after all, it was his home. He walked under a tunnel while looking up the most recent hero news on his phone, wearing sunglasses, which, although too dark for the average person to see through, helped him filter out unwanted details. This was all because of his quirk, and while having 6 eyes was a blessing, it was also a curse. In addition to seeing things more quickly and in greater detail, they were able to switch between visions based on the circumstances, and his eyes also aided in his hero analysis. Izuku's 6 eyes greatly aided him in his intense interest in analyzing the peculiarities of both heroes and villains, figuring out how to counter them, and even improving them. His mother first explained to him that his quirk was called Limitless, and that it was composed of 3 parts. The 6 eyes, a biological mutation that could not only detect when a quirk was being activated, but also, to a certain degree, comprehend a person's quirk simply by observing them. Its application was the manipulation of space. Unfortunately, he was unable to turn off the damn thing, but if he looked at someone like Bakugo, he would see the energy emanating from his quirk factor and in his palms. However, there were drawbacks to this power as well. One was that it required direct eye contact with the individual's body. However, his mother assured him that if he continued to train the 6 eyes, he would eventually be able to recognize the quirk instantly and gain the most profound insight into its operation. The other drawback was that in a world full of quirks, if he left his eyes open, they would constantly analyze quirks on their own, putting a lot of strain on his brain and making him see things in more detail than was necessary. It was very annoying, as if his eyes were feeding his brain too much information, and when he first realized that his eyes could do that, he was only 5 years old, and soon after he woke up his quirk, he would get migraines and headaches all the time. His quirk allowed him to see through the darkest glass in the world, something that a normal person would not be able to do. His mother found a way to get around that weakness by forcing him to wear the darkest glass available. On that day, Izuku discovered the hard way why his mother wore her eyes covered most of the time, and he was still able to see the world through some sort of infrared vision. Izuku missed the moving chunk of sludge that crawled out of the sewers because he was too preoccupied with his own rambling thoughts. As it approached Izuku, the sludge remarked, "Ah, a medium-sized cloak now, thanks to you I can finally escape All Might." His only thought as the living pile of sludge crawled towards him was, "All Might is in Musutafu?" Izuku simply raised his eyebrows and watched as the sludge crawled towards him. He sighed, activated Infinity, and the sludge then slammed into an invisible wall. "Is this your quirk, shit?" the sludge villain asked, a little stunned by the experience, and backed off. "Yes, and what will you do now that you know you can't touch me and All Might is pursuing you?" With a sly smile, Izuku inquired. The villain exclaimed, "Shit, realizing the predicament it had found itself in and deciding to leave the scene as soon as possible. However, All Might emerged from the sewers with a loud laugh and a mighty leap. "I'm here," All Might exclaimed as he emerged from the sewers, flashing his enormous grin and torn muscles. "You have been terrorizing this city long enough, villain." "All Might, All Might, All Might, OSHT, Izuku said, attempting, but failing, to control his fanboy tendencies. All Might punched the air in front of him, and even though it might have appeared to be an arbitrary move, the force of his blow was more than sufficient to destroy Izuku and the sludge villain. Izuku fell to the ground with a thud and then stood up, still gazing in wonder at All Might. "I apologize, young man. I may have overreacted, but I've been chasing that villain for hours." The liquid was all over the place. "It's okay, All Might, I understand, and we should probably capture that sludge," he said. "I appreciate your assistance, young citizen. I can handle it from here, though." With a confident smile, he said, "It's okay, All Might, and trust me, this will only take a second." He then raised his hands, attracting the sludge to create a perfect sphere, and All Might simply handed him a bottle without saying anything, into which he placed the sludge. Returning the bottle to All Might, he started to look within but groaned when he realized he had forgotten his notebook. "Tell me, young man, what your quirk is." "It's space manipulation," was Izuku's straightforward response. "Hey, that young man is really helpful, especially in the field of heroics." "All right, citizen, thank you for your ongoing support." All Might flexed his legs as he spoke. The remark made Izuku blush a little, and he noticed All Might stretching his legs, likely in preparation for departure. Izuku lifted his sunglasses to observe this man's quirk, and he was shocked by what he saw. Energy emanated from All Might's body, and Izuku deduced that his quirk involved storing energy that he released for brief outbursts of strength. Izuku noticed the wound at his side, and before he could even inquire as to what it was, All Might bounded off, leaving a trail of dust behind him. Izuku had two thoughts as he walked to Dagoba Beach. First, he failed to get All Might's autograph. Second, he had theories about All Might's quirk. He knew that All Might's quirk was an emitter that stored energy for brief bursts of strength, but he had a theory that suggested otherwise. If All Might's quirk was indeed an emitter quirk that stored energy, then the energy required for his feats would be too much for his body to handle, causing him to break his limbs each time he attempted to use the quirk, and the initial energy needed would be enormous. More than any stockpiling or strength could provide. Izuku kept thinking about All Might's quirk and his injury. He noticed that it was nasty, and he wondered what kind of villain could do that to him. Perhaps he didn't notice it because it was only a minor injury and he was only taking a quick look. After all, injuries were common in their line of work. Izuku kept thinking about it until he arrived at the train station and boarded the train, at which point he finally let himself sleep after setting the Dagoba Beach maps on his phone. Izuku was shocked by the amount of trash he saw when he arrived at the beach. There were broken cars, appliances, and heaps of trash and metal, and the entire area smelled like the city had just gathered to dump all of its garbage there. After taking off his sunglasses and cracking his knuckles in shock, Izuku grinned and said, "Operation Clean Dagoba Beach has begun." Before chanting, Izuku pointed his arms toward the trash to his left as a faint blue energy started to gather and swirl in his extended hands. Izuku repeatedly made the motion, but nothing happened. Thinking about his incapacity to use or master red, he chose to use its opposite instead. Technique reversal. Red. Technique amplification maximum output, blue. 1/3 of the trash on the beach had been obliterated and compressed into a tiny blue sphere the size of a basketball in an instant as the trash started to be absorbed and compressed into a small blue sphere in his palms. Izuku stopped the energy and looked around when he was satisfied. Izuku moaned as he gazed at the sphere in his hands, recalling what had happened when his mother had first attempted to explain it to him. If only he could use reverse techniques, he would never be able to use it, no matter how hard he tried. Rewind. It was 6 years ago. He got back up after Izuku fell across the floor, and he crouchingly charged low, deciding to go for an uppercut, but she ducked and kicked him in the gut, sending him sprawling across the floor once more. Izuku could honestly say that he had kissed the ground more times than he could count. Inko had switched from wearing contact lenses to black sunglasses to cover her eyes, and she was dressed in a black tank top and black combat pants. If you can't even make it through a basic fight with your beloved elderly mother, how can you become a professional hero? Come on, get up, Izu, we ain't done here. Oi, oi. Izuku stood up and gazed at her, while she merely held her hands in her pockets and sagged her shoulders. How the heck can you use red and black flash but I can't? What am I doing wrong? Izuku almost screamed, but he controlled himself despite his legs trembling and his eyes stinging from tears. After what seemed like an eternity of staring at him in bewilderment, his mother burst out laughing, saying, "Ha ha 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 ha, Izuku, to use techniques like that you need to be able to use the reverse of the energy you use now." "How do I do that?" Izuku asked, his blindfolded eyes confused but hopeful. "Reverse techniques are extremely difficult to master, so don't be too hard on yourself if you can't. It took me until I was 18 and in my third year of UA to fully master it. By multiplying two sources of cursed energy by one another, reverse techniques transform negative energy into positive energy. Consequently, destructive energy transforms into creative energy, and negative energy transforms into positive energy. Even though it seems easy enough, most limitless users find that producing reverse cursed energy is incredibly complex and challenging, so I wouldn't think less of you if you couldn't learn the technique." She paused her mumbling to check if Izuku was still listening, and she was so amused by what she saw that she burst out laughing. Sitting on the ground, Izuku was staring up at her, his face red and his head smoking from the stress on his brain, his face bewildered. "You know what? I give up trying to master the opposite method. What on earth caused the human body to become an arithmetic equation?" Izuku reverse techniques are intricate, as I mentioned, incredibly intricate. End of flashback. Izuku grinned, pleased with the outcome, and was about to repeat the maneuver when he sensed someone attempting to ambush him. Izuku dissipated the energy by holding nothing in his hands other than a tiny metal object that he placed in his pockets. Then, without looking back, he said, "I can see you, Momo," catching the arms that were attempting to touch him. "I briefly believed I had you there, however, there's always the next time." Izuku then turned his back to the new arrival, a rather tall and attractive girl with a mature build, long black hair in a spiky ponytail with a long strand hanging on the right side of her face, and large, sharp, dark eyes with short eyebrows set in a determined expression. "Good luck with that," Izuku said, grinning as he released her hands. "Are the eyes on the back of your head present? I don't mean to offend, but Momo looked curious." "Well, I guess we'll never know," Izuku remarked, extending his arms and legs out to the sides. "That doesn't answer the question, Izuku," Momo condescendingly remarked. She reluctantly dropped the topic, deciding that she wouldn't get an answer from him if she pressed the issue. For the time being, at least. "So, how did you persuade your mother to allow you to visit this place?" Izuku's statement diverted her attention. "Well, Elle just told her about your message and offer, and while she was initially reluctant at first when I mentioned Dagoba Beach, she just let me go." Momo's mother didn't even want her daughter to be a hero at first, and she would gladly let her train on some shabby beach when she could afford high-class Quirk gyms. Something seemed wrong, and Izuku, who knew Aunt Mayuko better, simply raised an eyebrow that she would just let her go like that. Perhaps his mother was involved in this. Momo went on, oblivious to Izuku's digressions. "It seemed like she was familiar with the place, and that I'd be doing good work for the community by cleaning up this dirty place." Izuku said, "That's nice," without really listening to more than half of the conversation. "Anyway, let's get to training and cleaning," Izuku said with a sly smile and a raised fist. Momo was only able to raise a fist in the air and smile clumsily. Yes, the day was going to be long. A skeletal blonde man with sunken blue eyes, a very thin frame, and clothes that hung limply from his body was walking across the city. He clutched his right side, and judging by the expression on his face, he was in pain. As he walked quietly, the man produced a handkerchief that had turned red from what were likely bloodstains and coughed in it, leaving yet another fresh blood stain on it. The sludge villain had forced him to pursue him for hours, and by the time he caught him, his time was almost up. God damn it, his old wounds started flaring again, reminding him of the eternal pain he had to bear for being the symbol of peace. He strolled silently, oblivious to onlookers' looks, until a sound startled him out of his reverie. The man sighed when he saw three teenagers, probably no older than 16, smirking and pointing a knife at the symbol of peace. A teenage boy with blonde hair pointed the knife at the old man and smirked, saying, "Look, old man, give us the money and there ain't gonna be any bloodshed tonight." The second teen with the snake mutation said, "Yeah, old man, we would honestly hate to hurt ya." The third one merely sliced with a knife. At any other time of day, these guys would have earned themselves a one-way ticket to Ketsubutsu Villain Rehabilitation Academy, but now they had to attack, the man sighed. However, he was weak now, and he truly detested having his weakness rubbed in his face in this way. He sighed once more, reached into his pockets, took out his wallet, and handed them the cash he had. "Are you done, old man?" After counting the money, the blonde teen inquired. The man replied, yes, yes, that's all. However, just as they were ready to leave, an orange-haired girl appeared and gave the teenage boy with the snake mutation a vicious, flying kick. An uppercut and a knee to the groin swiftly knocked out the other boys before they could adequately respond. The fact that this girl had quickly and viciously taken out 3 thugs, petty thugs, but thugs nonetheless, left the man in complete shock. Pardon me, sir. How are you? The girl continued, sheepishly rubbing the back of her head. I've called the police for these boys because I saw them harassing you earlier and I'm sorry I didn't come earlier. My legs just kind of moved on their own when I saw the right chance to attack. You have my sincerest appreciation, young lady, but could you please tell me why you assisted me? The man's face was serious as he asked. If I told you that my legs moved by themselves, would you believe me? Awkwardly, the girl asked. Young lady, what is your name? The man inquired. Itsuka Kendo, sir, the girl with the orange hair said. My name is Yagi Toshinori, and as I said, you have my deepest gratitude. Any decent person would have done it in my place. In addition, how can I become a hero if I disregard those in need? Toshinori coughed up a glob of blood at this realization. Kendo began asking incessantly in a panic. I'm so sorry, sir. Are you okay? I'm all right. It happens frequently. Toshinori dismissed her worries with a simple wave of his hand. Even though Kendo was still clearly shaken, this seemed to calm her down. You want to be a hero, young lady? Yes. Since I was a young child, this has been my dream, and I have worked extremely hard to make it happen. Kendo replied with a smile of nostalgia. If I may ask, what is your peculiarity? Toshinori asked, maintaining a straight face. Kendo responded, his face now serious, it's called big fists. I can enlarge my hands several times their normal size, and while it's an average quirk when combined with martial arts, it can be deadly. I can see your expertise in martial arts and I know you will make a great hero. A police car arrived to pick up the rowdy teenagers before she could respond to his statement. Kendo wanted to talk to them, but Toshinori interrupted, telling her to go home, which she grudgingly did. There was only one thought on Toshinori's mind as she left. Do you think she's the one? It all seemed so unreal. Even though Izuku had visited Ua a few times over the years, he was still unable to mask his feelings of anxiety, excitement, and trepidation as he entered the campus for what seemed like the first time. A few applicants who looked like him were passed by, but he chose to ignore them. Momo's mother insisted that she take the recommendation exam, so she was unable to accompany him. Izuku scowled and his face slightly irritated at the idea of recommendations because, although the entrance exam was the standard method of admission to Ua, the recommendations were much simpler and the most prestigious method. However, his mother refused to recommend him, instead suggesting Momo for Ua. Well, there was no point in thinking about that right now because nothing could make him feel any less cheerful. As he finished speaking, he noticed the king of assholes' perpetual scowl and spiky ash-blonde hair, which he could recognize everywhere. Fortunately, Katsuki did not notice or recognize him, and Izuku was so shocked that he didn't know when he bumped into someone who responded with a cute yelp. Katsuki Bakugo was a guy Izuku hadn't seen in a long time, and he was so shocked that his eyes lingered on Katsuki longer than they should have, his mouth hanging open. She stumbled, but as she started to float, she touched herself to keep herself from falling. Izuku said, "Ah, sorry there," as he glanced down at the floating girl. The girl said, "Oh, it's okay," as she performed a hand motion that made her float to the ground. Izuku could now clearly see her auburn hair, short round stature, and the perpetual rosy blush on her puffy cheeks as she got up and dusted herself. To be honest, Izuku thought she was rather adorable. Izuku could only smile sheepishly and say, "I'm sorry, I would have caught you but I didn't know you already had it covered." Simply, "It's fine," the girl said. With a curious tone, the attractive girl said, "So I take it you are here for the entrance exams?" "I'm taking the exam, but are you taking the entrance exam too?" "Yes. And my name is Ochako Uraraka, by the way. Your quirk, how does it work?" he asked quickly but quietly, not wanting to risk her recognizing him because of his mother. The girl didn't comment on the abrupt change in topic, if she was aware of it. "I can press my fingers together to restore the gravity of anything I touch after removing it with a device called zero gravity." Before she asked him his name, Izuku thought absently as he hurried away, what a fascinating quirk. The last thing he needed was for her to inquire about his mother. "Hold on. What's your quirk?" Ochako asked, approaching him at the same speed. With practiced ease, Izuku responded, "Space manipulation, reducing his speed." "Whoa, that's awesome." Ochako, who was now walking next to him, said, "By the way, "What's your name?" "Ah, screw it." Izuku detested this, and even if he could give her a false name, he would find it difficult to explain himself if she passed the test. "Izuku Midoriya," Izuku answered, accelerating the pace and displacing Ochako. Ochako, on the other hand, just stood there, not expecting this. She had left her mostly empty apartment, both excited and anxious about the exam that would determine her future, when this frank, attractive, green-haired boy bumped into her, almost making her eat shit on her dream day. He seemed mildly rude, not awkward, but pleasant to talk to, but what she had not anticipated was that the boy was related to the owner of one of the most well-known Japanese restaurants in Asia. She started to replay her exchange, feeling as though she had offended him. While many prospective students were stuck trying to find their way to the testing areas, Izuku had come here enough times to know his way around subconsciously, and he was very unhappy with himself as he moved easily through the halls of Ua. His mind kept replaying the conversation with Ochako, and he started to feel that he had come off as an asshole more times than necessary in their conversation, so he mentally noted that he should apologize to her later. When Izuku arrived at the testing location, which was merely a classroom, he noticed that other examinees were seated there. After locating his seat, he noticed a very worn-out power loader holding a stack of papers. When all of the examinees had arrived, 45 minutes later, the power loader started to distribute the papers. After doing so, he cleared his throat and spoke up. "I want to bring up a few points before you all begin. First of all, each paper takes 2 hours to complete, and you will be studying 3 subjects: math, science, and written heroics," the expert stated, ignoring the students' groans when math was brought up. Additionally, there would be roughly 100 questions in total for each subject. You would be given additional time to clean up and submit your work after 2 hours. Additionally, the expert paused and gave the students a stern look, saying, "Don't cheat. Avoid doing anything foolish that could lead to your involvement. I will be watching you all, and you will be disqualified and prohibited from taking the test for 3 years if you cheat. Finally, remember to go plus ultra." As they listened to Power Loader's words, nobody spoke. "Good, you all can start now." Izuku ignored the looks of surprise and admiration from other examinees because he had completed the 3 subjects in an hour, which was an accomplishment in and of itself. He raised his hands and informed Power Loader that he was done, and Power Laser simply told him to put it under his locker. Power Loader yelled at him, "You can stay in the cafeteria until the practical exam time comes." "Thank you, sir," Izuku snapped back. Izuku shut the door behind him and began to walk to the cafeteria, stretching his limbs. It was fortunate that his 6 eyes gave him increased brain processing power, and his mother and Aunt Mayuko took it upon themselves to teach him advanced science at the tender age of 9. Izuku entered the cafeteria, sat down on one of the chairs, and looked around, realizing he was the only one there. Izuku was so bored that he decided to look up the most recent hero news on his phone. He saw an article that said, "Bone Crusher spotted in Britain." Bone Crusher was an American villain from the past who had somehow just gotten out of jail, and he had a quirk that allowed him to manipulate the body's bone structure. Izuku remarked, "Well, that's comforting," with a hint of sarcasm in his tone. Izuku switched off his phone and went to Lunch Rush to place an order for food and possibly get his autograph. With a smug smile, Izuku walked to the UA auditorium, got his number, which was 6987, sat down, and saw Present Mike, one of his favorite heroes, whom he could proudly say he had listened to almost all of the man's podcasts. Present Mike went over the rules, and before long, he and the other examinees were taken to the exam zones on a bus. Izuku tried to control his excitement, but he knew he would pass because he had trained for this moment for almost his entire life. During his stretches, Izuku noticed Uraraka practicing breathing techniques. She was trembling, so Izuku thought this was the ideal opportunity to comfort her and offer an apology for his earlier rude behavior. He had barely taken 2 steps when someone grabbed him, and he allowed them to touch him to see what they wanted. A slightly taller boy then gave him a stern look. "The girl is getting ready for this test. Midoriya, what are you doing? It's a nice surprise to see you here. Do you want to distract?" The boy froze when he saw the green hair and dark glasses staring at him. The boy sputtered as he chopped the air so quickly that it seemed as though his arm was invisible, all the while making a perfect 90-degree bow. "Iida, don't worry." Izuku pointed to himself and said, "It's totally okay to miss the green hair and dark sunglasses." He turned to look for Uraraka, but it seemed like she was gone. He sighed and waved Iida off as the boy continued to chop the air in karate. A purple-haired boy with bags under his eyes frowned as he watched Midoriya take off. Damn, this exam was made for people like him. People with powerful and flashy quirks. He psyched himself, went to the front, and then blazed off, leaving dust and wind in his wake. No, I can't give up. Not like this, the purple-haired man said, his face changing to one of steely determination as he briefly accepted his fate and considered returning home. So, for what reason are you waiting? Go. 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 In real life, there are no countdowns. The present microphone yelled at them. In their haste, the examinees discovered nothing but metal husks, bolts, and scrapes on the floor. They were left speechless as they witnessed robot parts flying through the air and a loud creaking sound coming from the metal. Examinees watched in disbelief as an orange-haired girl ran and clenched her fists, chopping off a three-point shooter's leg and letting it fall to the ground with a loud bang before quickly moving on. After a blonde-haired boy yelled, "Oh oi, we can't let them take all the P points." The examinees soon scattered to find points. Since his emerald eyes were on full display and he had taken off his sunglasses, Izuku was genuinely having a good time, but speaking honestly, there was no other way to express his wide range of emotions. When he looked behind him, he saw a robot that had zoomed in on him. The boy in question just grinned and gestured toward the robot, and then a hole appeared in the middle of the robot's alleged torso. Izuku was able to maintain a composed and neutral demeanor despite his internal excitement and adrenaline rush. He moved faster than a blur, destroying a few robots in front of him by flying through them as if they were made of paper. As he appeared in front of a group of robots, he tore off the head of the first one, threw it at the second, and flew in the direction of the third. He indicated his palms, and the legs of the robot were engulfed in a faint blue energy before folding in on themselves like paper and hitting the ground with a loud thud. He straightened up and paused to look at his handiwork, but all he saw were metal husks and scraps that gave the entire area a Terminator or Transformers-like appearance. Izuku laughed to himself as he started to figure out how many points he had accrued. He estimated that he had about 100 points, which he believed would be more than enough to get him in. However, he decided to be safe than sorry and collect at least 70 more points before taking off to find more robots. Several dark figures could be seen observing the examinees inside a dimly lit room with multiple screens. Do you agree, Eraserhead, that these students show a lot more promise than the ones we had last year? Present Mike stated. Was the man's straightforward response, which could have been taken from The Walking Dead. The pro-hero Midnight responded sarcastically, "Lighten up, Shota. I know you didn't want to be here, but you're here now. No need to be such a hard ass." Eraserhead didn't respond. Instead, he concentrated on the son of Limitless on the screen. Eraserhead gave her a mild glare. "Limitless, you never told us your son was that powerful," he said. "Well, my genes are impeccable," said Limitless, who merely shrugged. Inko was blind to Eraserhead's growing glare. When Izuku made a three-pointer with a simple finger flick, a skeletal man gasped in surprise and said, "Wow, I didn't know your son was that powerful. Such a fervent demonstration of strength and sacrifice, it makes me." "What?" Beneath his mask, Eraserhead smirked as he asked. Midnight felt a sudden aura of death, which prevented her from finishing the sentence. Powerloader was crying as he watched his priceless robots being beaten up by children, and Ectoplasm and Present Mike were comforting him. "Why? My priceless robots, it's okay Majima, they're just robots." The situation was made worse by Present Mike's remark, as Majima started strangling Nezu while requesting a pay increase. "Your son exhibits experience, no judgmental problems, and no over-reliance on quirks like the blonde child in the other testing area. Without limits." Eraserhead looked at Izuku, who had paused and seemed to be counting something, most likely his points, and said, "Just maybe your son has potential." "My son has potential, of course, after all," he had learned from the best, and Inko's voice darkened and became much more menacing as he said, "Don't you dare think of expelling my son." Eraserhead swallowed the searing glare she threw at him, but he didn't respond to her seeming threat. "In any case, what is the boy's peculiarity?" Cementos inquired. After removing her threatening expression and glare, Inko responded, "Oh, it's space manipulation, allowing Eraserhead some respite." "Damn, that's one hell of a useful quirk," the current microphone said, echoing the opinions of every educator present. "Nezu, how many points has the child scored?" 13, who had remained silent until that point, inquired while not wearing her typical helmet. Nezu, who had managed to recover from the earlier throttling, used his paw to tap on the screen of a tab he was holding. The examiner's score appeared, with Izuku Midoriya leading with 212 villain points. "Gosh!" Looking at Izuku, who had ceased destroying robots and was assisting other examinees, Midnight yelled. "All Might, That K-Kid just smashed your record. 13 gestured to the skeletal, blonde man in the corner, who shared their shock. Woo, that's my boy. As she watched her son ace the test, Inko encouraged him. Before he could gather himself, Nezu, who had maintained his composure the entire time, pulled out a tab and burst out laughing in a way that made the teachers shudder. Well, I think the finale is about to begin. MWAHAA. As the voice of the present microphone echoed across the city, Izuku, who was assisting a purple-haired girl from being crushed, looked up. Examinees, 2 more minutes. Gosh, it was already 13 minutes? As the examinees stopped what they were doing and were frightened by what they saw, a loud rumble shook the ground. A giant robot, much larger than the ones they had been fighting, towered over the fake buildings. With each step, it shook the ground, and the examiners, including Izuku, began to move away. I've already earned enough points to pass, so there's no point in ruining that thing, especially with only a minute remaining. Damn, this thing looks pricey. A cry for assistance made him halt and turn around just as he was ready to take off. Uraraka, the girl who had previously attempted to make friends with him, was trapped beneath a pile of rube. Help! None of the other examinees appeared to care when Uraraka screamed. With a sigh, Izuku flew over to her and picked up the debris from her body. Her legs were bent, most likely broken, and he lifted her bridal gown carelessly before taking off. After dropping her off in a safe location, Izuku flew back to the location of the zero-pointer with the intention of destroying it, but what he did not anticipate was that the robot would shrink until he could no longer see it. He saw a black-haired girl shrug while holding a miniature version of the zero-pointer as he flew down to where it had once been. He looked at her with the 6 eyes and noticed that the energy around her hands grew and shrank, and he assumed that her quirk had something to do with the enlargement and shrinking of objects. As the black-haired girl stared at him while holding the zero-pointer like a toy, Izuku thought, "That's a pretty neat quirk." Izuku shook his head to get rid of such thoughts and looked at the students gathered around them. "That's a pretty neat quirk you got there," Izuku said, attempting to strike up a conversation with the girl now that he could see her. She kind of looked like Momo, but she was less endowed. "I'm Yui Kodai Hai," was the girl's monotone reply. It appeared that the girl was not the best at social interactions. Well, it's not like he was either, but Izuku raised his eyebrows without saying anything. As Izuku decided to introduce himself, he said, "I'm Izuku Midoriya," mentally saying, "Fuck it." The test is over now. The city was filled with the sound of Present Mike's voice. She widened her eyes, but before she could respond, a short elderly woman who Izuku recognized as the young heroine recovery girl appeared. Man, she really needed a new name because the terms, girl, and youthful, didn't fit her age. She walked over to Uraraka, who gave her a little yelp when she recognized her. The recovery girl had been a little upset with Nezu for putting the lives of aspiring pro-heroes in danger, but of course, so were other teachers who were currently throttling the rat. Now, why don't we all relax, dearies? What seems to be the issue, young lady? With a soft voice that could calm a raging bear, she questioned Uraraka. "I think I broke my ankle when some debris landed on me." As the healing process sapped some of Ochako's energy while repairing her broken ankle, Recovery Girl leaned down and kissed her hands, causing her to pass out quickly. She dipped her hands into her pockets, took out some gummies, and gave them to the examinees. "Now children, stretch out your hands and have these," she said. As he watched Ochako being placed on a stretcher and taken away, Izuku took some and chewed it absently. Then he noticed a purple-haired boy frowning, and he walked away while muttering to himself. He also noticed Ida's sad expression as he turned around and walked away, but not before giving him one final glance. Midnight gave Nezu a terrifying glare and said, "Damn Nezu, I knew you were crazy, but this is new. What the hell, man? Were you trying to kill them?" The little creature was frightened by her glare and the others that were directed at it. He had never experienced such a passive tingle running up his spine in his entire life. "It wouldn't have killed them. If I sensed any of the students were in mortal danger, I would have shut down the robot." The teacher's glare never went away, even though this seemed to calm them down a bit. And the zero-pointer was specifically designed to not put students in mortal danger. They calmed down visibly at that statement, but their glare never went away. Without realizing it, Inko said, "You better make sure that robot of yours is programmed well," echoing the opinions of all the teachers. Nezu merely smiled eerily at that remark. When Ochako woke up, she was overcome with fatigue. She believed she was going to die for a brief moment back there. She was pinned beneath the rubble and debris, and all of the examinees had ignored her. She briefly believed that she was at home, but the stark white walls that greeted her upon awakening served as a reminder. An elderly, well-known voice said, "Ah, you're finally awake," from next to her. She turned to see Recovery Girl smiling kindly at her from the small frame beside her bed. That smile was gone, replaced by a hard frown. "I should be scolding you for overdoing it, but I really can't fault you entirely since the zero-pointer put you to flee or destroy it, and from what I saw when I watched the footage back, you did try to run and avoid fighting but the rubble trapped you, preventing you from running." Ochako let out a sigh of relief at having barely avoided the old woman's anger. Recovery Girl continued, with that said, and then gave her a gentle tap on the head with her cane because she had spoken too soon. "You were on the brink of puking your guts out, young woman," she said. Ochako sheepishly defended, "I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. If I didn't push the dizziness I wouldn't have gotten points." Recovery Girl said, "I ought to have a long overdue with Nezu about teaching the concept of self-preservation." Her extremely severe tone made Ochako shudder. "I do not want to see you till the sports festival." "Yes ma'am." "It's yes, Recovery Girl, you hear me?" "Yes I mean yes, Recovery Girl." Recovery Girl said, "Well, since you are fine and awake now I can let your visitors in," jolting Ochako out of her reverie. Recovery Girl said, "You can come in now," with a resigned tone. Ochako saw only green hair that stood for a few seconds before entering as the door creaked open. Ochako could not resist squawking out, Midoriya?" Izuku rubbed the back of his head and said, "Yeah, it's me. I saw what happened to you and I just came to check on you to see if you were alright. And I also came to apologize for what happened earlier. I just don't know what came over me, and for that, I say I'm sorry," Izuku said, bowing slightly. Ochako's cheeks were flushed as she said, "It's okay. You saved me after all, and I should be the one thanking you." Izuku said, "Then what are we waiting for? My name is Izuku Midoriya," and he held out his arms to shake hands. She nervously shook the hand, and then the door opened, revealing Inko in her full costume, her eyes covered with contact lenses. She practically threw herself at him, trapping him in a bone-crushing embrace before Izuku could even react. She exclaimed, "Izu-chan, you were so cool. My son is so damn cool. Mom, please air," he whimpered out of his mother's smothering embrace. She released him and turned to face Ochako, who was staring at them with wide eyes. Wait, you are a pro?" Ochako called out almost aloud. Inko shrugged and said, "In a way yes, because I work here." Other than the fact that Midoriya's mother was a pro hero, none of the statements stuck in Ochako's mind. Ochako realized she was asking a blatantly absurd question when she said, "You're the owner of Izanagi Cuisine, aren't you?" Nobody in Japan was unaware of Inko, a businesswoman and investor who is among the country's wealthiest individuals. Talking to her made her extremely anxious, and learning that she was a pro hero made her anxiety even worse. Inko said, yes, that would be me," with a casual shrug that lacked the air of wealth that one would typically possess. With a nervous swallow, Ochako started to fidget on the bed she was sitting on. "I saw what happened to you, Uraraka, is it not? Are you okay now?" Ochako sputtered nervously, "Yes, it's Uraraka, Ochako Uraraka, and thank you for your concern. I'm fine now." With a sly smile on her face, she said, "Oh thank goodness, Izuku and I have been worried sick about you." Izuku sarcastically responded, "Of course I'd worry about her, it's not every day you see somebody get their legs trapped underneath a pile of rubble," avoiding his mother's taunts. His mother rolled her eyes and said, "Sheesh, tough crowd." Inko smiled affectionately and said, "So, Uraraka, you live around here? I mean, Izuku and I would love to invite you for dinner sometime if it's okay with you, of course." Ochako faithfully replied, "I wouldn't want to bother," but she was misled by the soft rumbling sound coming from her stomach. "Nonsense, it would be no bother at all," Inko said, grinning mischievously. "It would be nice seeing Izuku have more friends his age." Izuku's cold, calculating eyes suggested that his mother was plotting something, while the recovery girl, who saw and understood what Inko was attempting to do, turned away and began to chuckle to herself. Ochako said solemnly, "I'm not even sure I passed the UA exam. I don't even know if I should accept your offer." "I'm certain you two passed. In fact, I think you both make a great team." Her expression changed to one of mild happiness as she said, "Thanks, that means a lot to me. Even though you don't get accepted, which is unlikely based on your performance, I will still get you in, mark my words," Inko stated in a firm tone that made it impossible to doubt or ask questions. "Mom, aren't you one of the people grading the exams? Why are you telling us?" Izuku asked. "They didn't say I couldn't give you hints, and besides we haven't started grading it yet," Inko said, grinning as usual. Ochako raised an eyebrow and asked, "So Mrs. Midoriya, what is your hero name and why haven't I heard of you?" "I'm retired now, and when I was active my hero name was Limitless and I was an underground hero because I was never really one for the spotlight," replied Inko. Ochako, on the other hand, was ecstatic. If she didn't get into UA, her new friend, who was the son of a retired professional, had just offered to help her get in. Additionally, they were acting very casually about it, as if they hadn't just dropped bombs on her. A few pinches to her arm convinced her that what was happening was real life, even though she still didn't want to believe it. Inko politely interrupted her thoughts by asking, "So, are you coming over sometime for dinner or what? And it's completely fine if you decline." As Ochako put it, "Well, I guess I could accept." Nearly a year had passed since he cleaned Dagoba Beach, and 2 weeks had passed since the entrance exam. When his mother called his name, Izuku, who had nothing better to do, sat with his legs crossed in his chair and binge-watched shows from the pre-Quirk era, such as Stranger Things and The Witcher. "Izuku, it's here." There was nothing he could do but turn his head lazily and yawn wearily. From the front door, he heard his mother call, "Izuku, your letter is here." He glanced over the couch and saw her approaching him while holding the letter. She smiled and said, "Your acceptance letter, it's here." Izuku picked up the letter and stared at it for a moment. While some people might have been anxious to open the letter, Izuku wasn't, because he was confident he performed well on the written test and the number of robots he had destroyed was more than enough to gain him entry. Opening the letter seemed like a formality to him because he knew he had aced the damn test. "I am here." As a projection, he placed the letter and disc on the coffee table in front of him, but was startled when All Might materialized as a holographic projection from the disc. "I will be the one announcing the results, young Midoriya, and I would say that you did fairly well on the written portion, scoring 97%. That would have been more than enough to get you a spot in the general education department, but it doesn't stop there. You broke my record in the practical, scoring 212 villain points overall." "Damn, I went overboard," was all Izuku could say in a humorous tone. What kind of people would we be if we ignored a real hero in the making, even though that is more than enough to enroll you in the heroics course and put you in the first place? "We were also looking for a true judge of character," All Might said, leaning towards the camera with a constant smile on his face, and the video continued before Izuku could ask any more questions. "People who instinctively exhibit the traits of a true hero are the reason we have rescue points, and you, Izuku Midoriya, have accrued 45 of them." Then, the video cuts to the moments during the entrance exam when he prevented other applicants from being crushed or simply offered them support in general. "I'm here to let you know that you passed the test with a comfortable first place, scoring 257 points overall. I'm happy to tell you that young Midoriya, welcome to your Hero Academia." Izuku had 212 villain points and 45 rescue points, followed by Yui Kodai in second place with 50 villain points and 50 rescue points, Katsuki Bakugo in third place with 77 villain points and 0 rescue points, Abara Shiozaki in fourth place with 38 villain points and 32 rescue points, Itsuka Kendo in fifth place with 45 villain points and 22 rescue points, but one name caught his attention. Ochako Uraraka in ninth place with 30 villain points and 22 rescue points. "Oh, so she passed." Izuku's mouth twisted into a tiny smirk as the projection came to an end, and he turned to see his mother staring at the table with a neutral expression. She walked out after saying, "Congratulations," as if she knew Izuku would pass. "I wonder if Momo passed," was all Izuku could think about, so he instinctively reached for his phone, but instead he put it in his pocket and decided to call her later. He then grabbed his green hoodie from the rack near the front door and put it on before going to the arcade to play some games as a way to celebrate. "I'm heading to the arcade, Mom." He didn't want his mother to be concerned about his whereabouts, so he told her. "All right, but return before supper because I'm preparing katsudon." This was his mother's response. He took his shoes, slid the door open, and left without responding, but he understood her message. Bakugo was enjoying his day. He had aced the written test and dominated the exam, demonstrating the fucking extras place, and he recalled the rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins as he destroyed those robots to fucking atoms. When his old hag called him to see his entrance exam results, he walked down the stairs with a certain swagger as he went to open the formality because he already knew he had passed the fucking exam, which was his first to surpass All Might and be the greatest hero this goddamn world has ever seen. He was the best, and nothing would ever change that fucking fact. He destroyed the most robots in his zone, so when the letter from UA finally arrived in the mail, he knew it was just a formality. The written test was easy, so he pressed play on the disc that contained the formal letter, and a holographic projection of All Might appeared. He was thrilled because All Might himself was congratulating him on his performance, and it was the first step toward surpassing All Might, and no one would stop him. I'm here to let you know that you passed the test with a total score of 77 points, placing third overall. I'd like to let you know that young Bakugo, welcome to your Hero Academia. Now, Bakugo was horrified because the words, third place, kept repeating in his head, and he didn't even notice when the audio stopped. Bakugo did the most sensible thing and restarted the recording, sending it to the rankings, where he heard All Might inform him that he had placed third. No, he didn't destroy the competition and trash those robots in order to finish third, did he? The projection ceased once more, and Bakugo's thoughts were consumed by the seemingly insignificant detail that he had placed third, not second, not first, but third. He picked up the disc once more, restarted, and fast-forwarded it for the third time to view the rankings. Who the devil stole his thunder? Izuku Midoriya, with 257 points, was at the top of the rankings, followed by Yui Kodai, with 100 points. A girl and Deku of all people had outclassed him, the future #1 hero. This was unacceptable. Bakugo destroyed the disc with an explosion-powered punch and threw away the smoking pieces. He vaguely recalled that Kodai and he had attended the same elementary and middle school, but he never paid any attention to her because of her antisocial personality. Deku, that fucking bozo, had a confidence that rivaled fucking All Might, despite his quirklessness, and his old hag was always warning him not to get on Deku's bad side. However, when he disobeyed Deku, he manifested his quirk and then vanished from the face of the earth for 11 years. He recalled the reprimands he received from both his old hag and even his old man for attempting to teach a quirkless fool his goddamn place, and when the fucker eventually appeared after 11 years, he stole his spotlight. Deku, you hear me, motherfucker? I'll murder you when I see you. I'm the future #1. I'll put you in your fucking place soon, so enjoy your fucking victory while you can still do it. You hear me, you fucking Deku? Bakugo's eyes gleamed madly as he swore. Brat, what are you yelling up there? Did you not pass the test? Downstairs, Mistuki's voice could be heard. Fuck no, was Bakugo's straightforward response. Language. And why the hell are screaming if you didn't fail? None of your goddamn business, you shitty old hag. After that, Katsuki heard nothing but his mother's footsteps before she stormed into his room, her face displaying a look of annoyance. He ought to have shut his door, fuck. Izuku's phone started ringing as he was making his way home from the arcade. When he answered, all he could hear was Momo's excited voice. Izuku, I got in, congrats, Momo, was Izuku's upbeat response. Did you get in? Of course. Did you even doubt for a moment that I wouldn't get in? Izuku grinned. Of course. Who am I even asking? But congratulations on scoring the highest entrance examination points. After laughing, Izuku asked himself, how did you know I scored the highest? It's kind of hard not to hear those kinds of rumors, Izuku. It's what everyone is talking about. Izuku wondered what she was thinking about because she didn't respond. Damn, I went overboard with it. I planned to score at least 100 points initially, but I decided to add an extra 70 points and I guess I lost track. Anyway, wanna go for a cup of coffee? Tomorrow perhaps. I would be busy today as my mom is hosting some relatives from overseas. Sure, I'll text you the place, after 3 months. Izuku made some last-minute preparations while standing in front of the mirror. He made sure that he had taken everything. After finishing, he went to examine himself in the mirror. He was now 180 centimeters, 5 feet 11 inches, tall, having grown 2 inches in the previous 3 months. He still had years to mature. He would be at least 195 centimeters, 6 feet 5, by the end of his 18th birthday if his height continued to rise at this rate. While he was not as tall as his mother, who was a towering 185 centimeters, 6 feet 1, he was still well above average. The UA had dispatched their uniform via parcel a week prior. Over a white long-sleeve shirt, dark blue pants, and a red tie, there was a gray jacket with blue-green stripes and dark turquoise trimmings. Izuku took another look at himself in the mirror. In addition to wearing the U, he had a new haircut that tamed his wild hair to the base of his neck. Despite wearing a uniform, he wore casual black lace-up sneakers, a red tie knotted appropriately around his neck, and slim-fitting pants. He wore a black blindfold over his eyes instead of his typical glasses, which supported his hair and gave it a spiky look, easily increasing his height by 2 inches. After that, he went to the front door and saw his mother standing there. The uniform really suits you, Izuku, thanks, but I think we should be going now, Izuku said, attempting to avoid coming across as frustrated. Sure thing. Just let me grab my keys. Izuku strolled through Yu's corridors. With his hands in his pockets and his sling backpack slung over his shoulders, he found his classroom, Class 1A, with practiced ease. Izuku was certain that he could arrive at school at least 10 minutes before homeroom began, as Momo had informed him over the phone that she had arrived less than an hour ago. This place was a fucking maze, so it was fortunate that he knew his way around. When he arrived at the Class 1A, he was astounded by the size of the door and was filled with admiration for UA didn't experiment with architecture despite the school's size. Damn, UA has a lot of money. Wonder if they built it for people with mutant quirks? He decided to leave the area and opened the door to find some familiar faces among the people chatting. Bakugo appeared irate as he repeatedly chopped his arms in a karate manner. Take your legs off this desk this instant. It is unbecoming of us freshmen to vandalize the desk our predecessors have sat on, Lita yelled at him. Izuku was already worn out. All he could do was hope the other students weren't like those two. And who the fuck do you think you are, you damn extra? I'll blow your ass to kingdom come. He sighed resignedly as he entered the barely occupied classroom, ignoring their argument and looking around. A scraggly, dark-haired man's face emerged from a yellow sleeping bag behind the podium in the front of the classroom, where his eyes instantly fell. After a few moments of staring at one another, Izuku shrugged and moved to his seat. He had identified the man as Eraserhead, but to be honest, he had only looked up information about him to pique his interest. Izuku went to his designated seat, which was behind a boy with red and white hair, and sat down before turning around to see Momo standing behind him. He turned around to see her wave a little in acknowledgement and smile. The boy with the multicolored hair turned around and said, "Hello," in a monotone. He said, "Midoriya," but it was difficult to read his thoughts from his expressionless face. "Oh hey Shoto, you passed. But to be honest, I didn't expect to see you in Class 1A. How were the exams?" Izuku asked inquisitively. "It was fine," Todoroki said in a neutral tone. Todoroki had nothing more to say, so he just turned around and went about his business. Deku. Bakugo's low growl jolted him out of his reverie. Izuku was at a loss for words as he slowly met the blonde's intense, piercing red eyes, which were filled with barely contained indignation. It had been over 10 years since their last meeting, which had not been particularly pleasant. He didn't know if Bakugo had changed, if he still hated him and wanted to kill him, or if he had always been a misguided tsundere who was unable to articulate his emotions. In any case, Izuku mentally noted that he should be avoided. Someone ran in front of Bakugo, chopping his hands, before he could speak. "Midoriya. I must apologize for my behavior at the entrance exam," he said dejectedly. "It was unbecoming of a future hero to cast judgment upon you before even speaking to you. You figured out the rescue points better than I ever could." Izuku could only groan in response to Ida's statement. "I was very impressed by your record-breaking achievement at the entrance exams, Midoriya," which irritated a certain ash blonde. A teenager with red hair said, "It's him, the record holder." He recognized Izuku's name. Bakugo frowned at Izuku from the other side of the classroom and said, "TCH. The others, all of them." At the same time, the majority of the students in the classroom, judging by the small number of empty seats, looked at him. Izuku said, hi," to the entire class. He wasn't used to being the center of attention all at once. A boy with a real bird's head asked a blonde with a black streak in his hair that looked like a lightning bolt, "So he's the guy that scored even more than All Might?" Glancing between Izuku and the redhead, the blonde answered, "No way, are you for real?" A girl with purple hair said, "I heard the old record was like 161 or something, and thanks for saving me during the exam by the way," as she turned to face Izuku. A vidette girl with big eyes and long hair said, "I saw the list for the entrance exam, he got 257 on it, Kiro." A short boy with purple balls on his head said, "That's crazy." "Thankfully," Kirishima said, "the name's Ejiru Kirishima. You were so manly in the entrance exam," to spare Izuku from additional questions. Thanks, Kirishima-san, after all, we're going to be in the same class, so there's no need for formalities," the now named Kirishima exclaimed. When Momo saw her old classmate, she waved her hands and said, "Lita-san, it's nice to see you here." Lita joyfully said, "Ah, likewise Yayuerzu-san," before bowing perfectly at a 90-degree angle. Todoroki raised an eyebrow in question, "You two know each other?" "We're from the same middle school," Todoroki said. "Same, right?" But Bakugo spoke up before Momo could respond. "Same. No wonder Four Eyes over there thinks he can tell me what to do, just because you attended some shitty school for rich kids. You think you're a fucking elitist? I'll blow you to bits." Disturbed by the profanity emanating from this would-be professional hero, Lita questioned, such uncouth language. Do you really wish to become a hero? Momo casually said, you'll get used to it, Lita-san, waving a hand in an attempt to comfort the now gaping fish like Lita. Shut it, big tits. Why, you? As Momo and Bakugo engaged in a heated argument, Izuku and Todoroki just went about their business as if they had witnessed this before. By this point, every chattering student had paused to glance around and see who was yelling profanity at the top of their lungs. Even though it was only the first day, Izuku could already feel the entire class focused on them. Well done. From the sleeping bag on the floor, a weary voice said, it's just the first day and you kids have already found ways to make me lose sleep. When the bag opened, a shaggy-haired man drinking a juice pouch appeared to be about to topple over from a slight gust of wind. Aizawa stood in front of them with a flat, unimpressed glare, and the entire class turned to look at the yellow sleeping bag that was left on the floor. Everyone hurried to their seat if they hadn't already, and they all waited in silence for their homeroom to start. He simply said, his glare unwavering, it took you all 8 seconds to get yourselves in order. Such a lengthy waste of time could cost lives in the field. I expect it to improve, as he reached behind the podium and produced a blue PE consistent. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Put these on and follow me to the PE fields. In his characteristically direct style, Aizawa began. The Department of Education mandates that students not use their quirks when conducting fitness tests in middle school. It's the height of irrationality. It gives the impression that everyone is equal when that just isn't the case, for better or for worse. Today, we'll be conducting a quirk apprehension test. The students began to murmur, and then a girl with orange hair held up her hands. Yes, what is it? Aizawa said, sounding bored as usual. Sir, what about orientation and... Aizawa interrupted Kendo's question with a simple wave of her hand. UA isn't like your traditional school in a lot of aspects, and one of those aspects gives teachers leeway to handle their classes and students however they see fit. Heroes don't have time for inconsequential things like orientation, he responded before focusing on Izuku. Ignoring Bakugo's initial flinch at the mention of Izuku's name, he said, Midoriya, you ranked first in the entrance exam. How far could you throw in middle school? 500 meters, give or take, without your quirk. As I said, 500 meters, 500 meters? The entire class, with the exception of Iida and Momo, cried in awe. To think that without even employing their quirk, someone could throw that far. Some even had a smug, incredulous expression on their faces. Aizawa pointed at the circle with an exasperated expression. The pro hero threw a ball at Izuku, but it stopped a few inches from him. All right. Come up to the circle and toss this ball. After examining the ball, he walked inside the circle and used cursed energy to reinforce it. He assumed a pitcher's stance and threw the ball as hard as he could, but just before he did so, the energy covering his hands flashed black, and he threw as hard as he could while kicking up dust. The ball broke through the sound barrier and was out of sight in less than a second. When the machine beeped a few seconds after Aizawa held it in his hands, his eyes widened in surprise for a brief moment before returning to their worn-out and bored expression. There were 2,509.79 meters, according to the distance calculator. Bakugo said, 3 kilometers. In shock, how the hell did you do that? Aizawa turned her back on Bakugo and stated, this is what you are capable of achieving when you use your quirk. Midoriya's score increased multiple times. You all will be going through these simple tests with your quirks. Whoa! Cried a happy girl with pink skin. We will be able to use our quirks. This is going to be fun. Aizawa gazed at the girl, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Aizawa asked, fun, you say? As the word rolled off his tongue as if it were a foreign one. Don't tell me you were planning on having fun. For 3 years here at UA, you know, let's make this more fun. Whoever comes in last, he said with his trademark grin, would be deemed to have no potential and would be expelled. Ochako angrily exclaimed, that's not fair. We just got here, and you're threatening to expel one of us on the first day. Fair, sneered Aizawa. Nothing about life or heroism is fair. Are natural disasters fair? Villain attacks on civilians? Targeting a hero's family or catching them specifically on their day off, is that fair? Take it or leave it. Alright. Aizawa made some good points because being a hero wasn't all fun and games. There were risks and repercussions associated with the job. Looking at his classmates, Izuku noticed that Ochako and Lita had solidified their resolve, while Momo and Todoroki appeared uninterested. Izuku would be lying if he said he wasn't excited to watch his classmates' quirks in action, but it was amazing to watch him practically become a blur across the 50-meter track to finish in only 2.45 seconds. Asui was not far behind, finishing in 4.58 seconds. The first test was a 50-meter dash, and Iida was called up to start alongside a girl who had what looked like a frog mutation quirk. A blonde boy propelled himself across the track with his naval lasers, and Izuku watched with interest as his classmates used inventive methods to finish the 50-meter dash. Ochako lightened her clothes and finished the dash in less than 7 seconds, while a fawn-haired girl who ran with Ochako finished the race in 5 seconds. Bakugo, Midoriya, your turn, summoned Aizawa. Bakugo walked beside Izuku, glaring and preparing his palms behind him as he went to the track and started stretching. Deku, you think you're really cool? Watch as I slay this test and put you and the rest of these fucking extras in your goddamn place, Bakugo growled. Izuku said, sure, whatever you say, without even trying to mask his annoyance and disinterest. The explosive blonde became even more enraged by Izuku's response, but he chose to let his deeds speak louder than his words and chose not to respond. Izuku used blue for short-range instantaneous movement as soon as the signal went off, and he ran to the end of the track. When he stopped, he turned to see Bakugo trailing behind him, and the boy eventually used his explosions to reach the end of the track. Bakugo 4.13 seconds, Midoriya 0.58 seconds. Bakugo's eyes widened in shock as Izuku walked back to his friends, smirking at their shocked faces, while Momo and Todoroki were the only ones who weren't shocked or showed indifference. His classmates let out cries of shock as the machine announced the time. My goodness! That went by so quickly that I missed everything. What's your oddity, handsome boy? The girl with the fawn hair who had faced Uraraka approached him to inquire. Space manipulation, by the way, lovely girl, what's your name? Izuku grinned in response. Utsushimi Kami, she said, her face flushed from being referred to as attractive. Izuku decided to introduce himself and said, Izuku Midoriya. Why did you cover your eyes? Kami inquired in an inquisitive tone. Izuku pointed to his eyes and remarked, I have enhanced eyesight and leaving them uncovered is kind of a pain. That is truly incredible. With her eyes wide and a smile on her face, the girl with the fawn hair exclaimed. I suppose I'm grateful, Izuku said, perplexed by both her complimenting his quirk's flaw and her exaggerated accent. What can you do with your peculiarity, then? Is it similar to the prison hero Spacelock, or is it similar to Rocklock, or? She asked inquisitively for a long time. Yaoyorozu used her quirk to make skates, which she used to cruise the track in 4.40 seconds, while Todoroki used his ice to slide across a second ahead of her in 3.37 seconds. Izuku turned just in time to see Todoroki and Yaoyorozu about to take the 50-meter dash. Kami asked, and Izuku shrugged before responding, I can manipulate space for a variety of effects because of my quirk. I can levitate, fly, attract, and stop with it. You understand the point, then? Whoa, that is amazing. With actual stars in her eyes, Kami answered, your peculiarity is far more awesome than mine. Izuku didn't say anything about her exaggerated teenage accent, if he noticed it at all. What's your quirk anyway? Glamour is the name of it. I like using it to make pictures of things that aren't real. Like delusions? Yep, like illusions. But wait, are you related to Mystic, the pro-hero? Isn't that obvious? She's my older sister, Kami said, her expression appearing to be deep in thought. Wow, your quirk is cool no matter what anyone says, Utsushimi-san. Don't sell yourself short, as your quirk, while not overly flashy or combat-oriented, is pretty useful with stealth missions and with the right application could be a pretty deadly quirk. Kami said, thanks, Midoriya, with a smile now. Please, just call me Kami, no need to be so formal, Greenie. Granny? She laughed and covered her mouth with her hands as she said, you know your hair's like totes the right shade of green and it's spiked up like a paintbrush. The two students jumped to attention when Aizawa said, as interesting as Midoriya's quirk is, we have tests to finish. Izuku watched as the rest of the class completed their 50-meter dash, trying to memorize quirks. Call me Izuku then, Izuku said as he gave her the thumbs up and turned to leave. Grip strength was the next event. Mezzo Shoji was the most impressive in terms of raw strength, weighing roughly 540 kg. By creating a pair of gloves with hydraulic pistons attached, Momo once again showed off the versatility and inventiveness of her quirk, which improved her grip strength and helped her score 300 kg. Ochako and Jiru had not done well in grip strength, with Ochako scoring 50 kg and Jiru scoring 45 kg. Iida had managed to score 100 kg, which was impressive in and of itself. Kami had trained for someone whose quirk wasn't strength-oriented, and she scored an impressive 79 kg. Next was Kendo, who enlarged her fists and scored an impressive 350 kg. When it was Izuku's turn, he used blue to compress the device's space before destroying it entirely. The device showed 999 kg and beeped loudly. The entire class was stunned by the outcome once more. How could a person's quirk have such power? To Bakugo's dismay, Izuku dominated almost the entire test in the events that followed. The frog-like girl outperformed Kendo, Ochako, and Kami in the endurance run, with Izuku using Infinity to fly out and outrun everyone by at least an hour, Momo creating an electric scooter, and Bakugo coming in third, sliding on his ice, and Bakugo coming in a close fourth, propelling himself with his explosions. When it was Izuku's turn, he just used his quirk to fly across the sandpit. Izuku was captivated by the long jump, watching Ochako make herself weightless and cross the sandpit in one jump, the frog girl cross the sandpit in one leap, and the blonde-haired boy use his naval lasers to propel himself across the pit. The next event was the ball throw, where Izuku was permitted to sit back because he had already performed the event and watch the others take it. His years of dodge training helped him a lot in the repeated side steps, trauma notwithstanding. The short boy with balls for hair was the clear leader in that event by using his quirk as trampolines to bounce between. Only a handful stood out. Bakugo screamed, "Die!" and detonated a huge explosion. After seeing Yayoi pull an entire cannon from her midsection and launch the ball with it, he became enraged that his impressive score of 705.2 meters was lower than his own. The teacher awarded Ochako a score of infinity, shocking everyone by simply negating the ball's gravity and throwing it into orbit. Although he received a high score, Izuku was only unable to use his quirk in the repeated side steps, sitting toe touch, and sit-ups tests because he was unable to figure out how to apply it in those situations. Aizawa drew lead and showed a holographic list from the device he used to measure their scores. It would be a waste of time to display all of the individual scores, so here are the cumulative rankings, he said. Izuku looked at the list and was not surprised to see that his name was at the top, followed by Bakugo in fourth, Todoroki in third, and Yayoi in second. Izuku noticed Minoru Mineta's name in 20th place after looking further down. Izuku couldn't help but feel sorry for the little boy because of the horrified expression on his face. Getting into your dream school after passing the entrance exam, only to be kicked out on the first day. The fourth? Crazy fourth? I didn't even place second, so forget about first place. Deku beat me again, fucking. The eruptive teenager was furious. Deku. Izuku turned to face Bakugo, who was running toward him like a rabid dog, his palms poised to send Izuku flying to Kingdom Come. But Bakugo crashed into an unseen wall as he approached Izuku. He raised his arms and attempted to blast Izuku, but nothing came out. Suddenly, what appeared to be a rope wrapped itself around the growling Bakugo. When he managed to turn his head around, he noticed that Aizawa was using his quirk, as evidenced by his raised hair and angry expression. After giving him a very harsh reprimand, Aizawa released Bakugo and restored his quirk. It would do you well to quiet down, Bakugo. You have a good quirk, but I wouldn't lose any sleep over expelling someone like you. Bakugo silently raged at Izuku for making him look foolish in front of the extras, but fortunately he was smart enough not to try to attack Izuku because doing so would permanently damage his record. Izuku thought, what a prick, as Bakugo gave him a murderous look. Thus ended the ill-conceived Tsunere theory. Smirking at their astonished expressions, Aizawa remarked, by the way, I lied, no one is getting expelled today. You're all safe, for now, Aizawa said, reverting to his typical bored expression. It was just a ruse to get you all to be on your toes and try your best. The tension in the class instantly subsided, and some of the more gregarious teenagers became more animated and engaged in conversation with one another. Well, of course it was. It should have been obvious if you just thought it through, Momo muttered to herself, unable to control the small scoff that came out of her. Maybe I should have said something? She asked herself. No, Momo, you're wrong there. Izuku was aware that something was wrong. In just 2 weeks, this man had dismissed his students on the grounds that they lacked potential. Why are they so dissimilar? Aizawa-sensei, you've expelled over 150 students in your time working here, including the last semester who you expelled in under 2 weeks claiming they had no potential. What makes us different? We're heroes in training and we can handle the truth, sensei. Momo felt compelled to ask, Izuku, what are you doing? But she was disregarded. Izuku did not recoil as Aizawa gazed at him. The student flinched and stiffened in fear as Aizawa finally closed his eyes and grinned, saying, I was not lying about someone being expelled. In my time here, I've expelled 154 students. Last semester, I expelled my entire class in just under 2 weeks. He then opened his eyes and glared at Mineta. Understand this, the only reason none of you are going home today is because I see potential in all of you. If I thought you had no prospects at all, I would have cut you loose immediately. There is nothing crueler than letting someone chase around a half-baked dream. As he spoke to the class, Momo's eyes widened in fear and she took a half step back, covering her lips with her hand. And that goes for each and every one of you. If I feel you're slacking off and not being serious about your position here, I would kick you out so fast it would have your head spinning. They all shuddered in front of him as he fixed them with his gaze. Any other questions? He asked. No, Sensei, was the terrified response from every student. He turned around and said, Good, you're dismissed. The students then departed. I thought I had it figured out. I was so sure, Momo murmured to Izuku in a dejected manner. It's okay, Momo. This man is an underground hero, and if not for the fact my mother works here and tells me about him, I wouldn't have figured it out either. With their hearts pounding and their adrenaline flowing, a number of people slumped to the ground after losing sensation in their legs. It was a very quiet group that eventually returned to 1A, with the exception of a few who were unaffected by the speech and left right away. Aizawa was walking calmly back to class after the Quirk apprehension test, his hands in his pockets, when he noticed All Might, in all his grandeur, looking down at him with his dazzling smile that never left his face. Hello, Eraserhead, All Might exclaimed, clumsily waving his palms. Aizawa asked in his typically disinterested tone, Did any of the kids catch your interest? Aizawa's question perplexed All Might, who said, what do you mean? Aizawa pondered out loud, though it was unclear to whom. I wonder how you got your spot as the #1 hero if you're that terrible in stealth. How did you know? All Might inquired, astonished that Aizawa could discover his child snooping so quickly. It wasn't hard. I wonder why none of the kids called you out or noticed you were spying on them. Why you were even spying on us is none of my business, just answer the question I asked in the beginning. Well, all of the kids caught my interest in their way with their unique abilities. But seriously, that was quite the stunt you pulled. Threatening to expel kids on their first day? Aizawa turned away from All Might and remarked, If you had listened to what I said, you'd know that it wasn't a threat. You're hosting the orientations along with Nezu later today, so if I were you, I'd use my time more rationally, he said, turning around. Then he left All Might by himself in the corridor. In order to remind himself of his time limit, All Might gripped the area where his wound was. He spied on Class 1A in part for that reason, to assess their skills and peculiarities and determine whether any of them should inherit One for All, but a voice in the back of his mind told him not to. I should probably let One for All die with me since All for One is dead. What would Master think of me now? He thought as he left, his face a little dejected. Izuku didn't miss much of the return to the regular school schedule the following day, and since UA was a school that concurrently integrated the curriculum for hero training, high school, and university, making everything twice as challenging. Unsurprisingly, UA had such a low rate of acceptance, but he acknowledged that having teachers as role models was cool, and he didn't think the novelty would fade anytime soon. His favorite class of the day, however, was the Practical Heroics or Foundational class, and none of his classmates were aware that All Might himself was teaching it. Izuku pondered what it would be like to receive instruction directly from All Might. The Hero Commission claimed that All Might was occupied with vacation learning, teaching experience, just before he vanished from the public eye for a long time, 11 years ago. Just having All Might there helped UA applicants each year by a significant margin, and even after he gained notoriety again, he began to devote less and less time to combating crime under the pretext of training the next generation. However, All Might never attended UA talk less about teaching even after 11 years of employment. Thus, his teaching experience was at its most basic. Izuku almost made fun of himself for not realizing this basic fact sooner, and he became suddenly less excited for his upcoming class. However, All Might made himself known with his raucous demeanor before he could go down that rabbit hole. I am here, walking through the door like a normal person. Holy crap, is that his Silver Age costume? When Asui, the blunt one, interrupted, That's not how a normal person walks through a door, Kiro. I am here, walking through the door like a weird person, was how All Might rephrased himself after hearing Asui's statement, causing the class to laugh. Alright, young zygotes, are you ready for hero training? Please change into your costumes in the locker room and meet me on the ground beta. When Izuku pressed a button on a wall while he was standing in the locker room, A panel in the wall opened to reveal a case holding his costume. After grabbing his costume case, he started getting ready to change for his first real-world heroics lesson. Seated on a bench, Izuku gazed down at his costume's unopened case. He was greatly influenced by All Might when he first drew up a design at the age of 4. It even featured a cowl with 2 long limbs that were meant to resemble the 2 distinctive locks of hair that All Might wore. He went back and redesigned the costume concept as he matured, and his devotion to All Might gradually waned into something less fervent. A black zip-up jacket with a high collar that was fairly wide, slim-fitting black pants, black combat boots, and a black blindfold were the end result. Over time, many of Izuku's old habits began to fade away as he rediscovered his quirk. He stopped stuttering, using his hero analysis notebooks, and muttering, though he continued to mutter in his head. He possessed the same trait as his mother, who was prone to what she referred to as mental muttering, and because he had 6 eyes, he no longer saw the point in writing down helpful quirks in a notebook when he could figure them out with a quick glance. Additionally, because his quirk gave him the greatest offensive and defensive power, he stopped coming up with elaborate costumes and instead chose to be stealthy. He transformed into his costume and began to move toward ground beta when he saw someone start to follow him. "Ya no, I was expecting a bit more creativity from the record breaker," remarked a blonde with a streak of lightning in his hair in jest. If he was not mistaken, he thought he was Kaminari. Izuku's eyes twitched behind his blindfold when the record breaker was mentioned, and he replied, "My quirk provides enough protection. Adding any other thing would only be overkill." Izuku half-heartedly remarked, "Nice costume by the way," referring to his basic outfit consisting of a jacket with white lightning bolt-like outlines, black joggers, and a plain white t-shirt. Kaminari remarked idly, "It's as plain as they come," referring to his outfit. Behind him, Ochako chirped, "Nice costume, though I was expecting a bit more color." "Thanks, and I can see the space motif you were going for." The recognition made Ochako smile, but her smile wavered a little. "I'm glad you noticed. I wanted something a little more puffy, though, sorta like 13's suit. This one's a little skin tight." Then Momo came up behind him, her costume clearly visible. It was a futuristic white combat boot, a red skin-tight zip-up bodysuit, forearm bracelets, and a yellow utility belt. "I must say, Izuku, you choose practicality over impact. Seems like a truly wise decision. I wish I would have thought the same. Although it is a nice costume, but I thought you'd be going for something like your mother's costume," Momo said as he walked alongside him and laughed. Izuku pointed to Momo's bracelets and remarked, "Well, my mother's costume isn't my type. I dunno why she even included the gauntlets, and speaking of gauntlets, what exactly are those for?" Auntie Inko is an absolute pro. Costume. Bakugo, who just so happened to overhear their conversation, had this thought. Momo grinned like a child displaying a toy and said, "Oh, these are just a digitalized version of my Yaourictionary." "Yaourictionary? Isn't that the chemistry notebook for your formulas?" Momo rambled on about her digitalized Yaourictionary, saying, "Yes, and this digitalized version allows me access to the internet, gives me molecular formula of things I don't know." All Might interrupted their vastly divergent ruminating by outlining the nature of their first lesson. A battle trial. He clarified that the class would be split up into 2-person teams using cue cards. In a mock scenario, the teams would compete against one another, with one team portraying villains with a big bomb inside a building and the other team playing heroes trying to stop them. Following his explanation, a few people made the decision to complain. "Wouldn't it have been better to just have us form pairs?" Lida asked sharply, raising his hands. "Is it truly all right to decide at random?" Before the hero could respond, Izuku responded. All Might and a few of Izuku's classmates appeared impressed. "It is to simulate a real-life situation. Heroes often don't get to choose who their partners are when disaster strikes. This is to teach us to plan on the fly and to think how we can combine our powers." The class began to form up, and as he looked around for his partner, he noticed Kendo, if he was not mistaken, approaching him with a warm smile. He then held out a box for them to draw lots for which team they would be on, and Izuku found himself on Team J. He then looked to Ochako, but she was on Team C, and Momo was on Team D. Izuku raised an eyebrow behind his blindfold and asked, "You're on Team J, right?" As Kendo exclaimed, "Yup. Guess we're partners for today." She smiled at Izuku, who blinked and then smiled back. "I guess we are." Kendo's outfit consisted of a loose, long-sleeved black bodysuit, a knee-length, sleeveless turquoise kipao, a loose brown utility belt around her waist, a thin black domino mask with goggles around her eyes, and white navy blue boots with wide vamps that reached her toes. The boots were filled in with black fingerless gloves and white slips. It was a really well-planned costume all around. All Might yelled, "Now, for the first group," as he reached into a box containing slips of paper with labels. Team J will be the hero team. Kendo stated, "Well then, we have to go first," as Izuku fixed his gaze on the box held by All Might. "And the villain team will be Team B." Izuku glanced around to see if any team would start to acknowledge him, and his gaze fell on Bakugo's savage smile and Lita's unintelligible mask-wearing gaze. "The fuck," was all Izuku could bring himself to say at that time. To attend a brief meeting, Inko strolled to Nezu's office. She had important things to discuss with Nezu during her break, and the fact that he didn't text her the details or talk to her over the phone demonstrated how important it was, even though she really wanted to sit in the teacher's lounge and pretend she didn't know about Midnight swooning over her or listening in on students' conversations. After deliberately postponing for roughly 10 minutes, she made the decision to visit his office. When she arrived at Nezu's office, she was ready to knock on the door when she heard a resounding, "Come in," from within. Nezu was sitting down organizing some papers when she opened the door, and then she decided to place a paperweight on it. "Makumo, I'm glad you could make it and right on time too," Nezu cheerfully said. Inko couldn't hide her astonishment as she asked, "You were expecting me now?" He paused to give Inko time to put it together. "Well, your break would be the best time to see me, so," he gestured to the chair across from him and said, "Anyway, please have a seat." Cheerfully, Nezu holds a teapot in his paws and asks, "Tea? Before we begin, would you like anything?" Inko sat on the chair and drawled, "Sure. Give me 4 tablespoons of sugar." Before giving it to her, Nezu adds 4 sugar cubes. Nezu said, "That's quite a lot of sugar," as Inko sipped her tea. I have a bit of a sweet tooth," gave Inko a contemptuous response. "A bit?" inquired Nezu. He was certain that at this moment, if he had eyebrows, he would be raising them in doubt. He pulled out a red sealed envelope and handed it to Inko, who took it and opened it, choosing to disregard that and get right to the point. "Is this about the MLA?" Inko inquired as she produced the envelope's contents, which included numerous photographs. Nezu said, "Yes, I have found a new lead, and from what I've seen it seems war may be coming sooner than anticipated," in his characteristically rapacious manner. Inko raised the envelope's contents to eye level, revealing a news article about the increased presence of Detenarod in Deka City along with several photos of men in suits meeting and shaking hands. Unable to fully understand how the article and the images were related, Inko asked suspiciously, "What are these for exactly?" "There has been increased Detenarod presence in lately, not enough to draw suspicion but enough to come to a few conclusions if you read more than what is between the lines." Inko pointed to a photo of a middle-aged man in a suit shaking hands with a woman with blue skin and asked, "Isn't this the CEO of Detenarod in this picture?" "Yes, I would also like to believe that is him, not to mention the increased amount of organized villain raids as of late." Nezu clarified, "And the villains who have Quirk supremacist views all had support tech rivaling that of heroes, and all of these point towards Detenarod," in a voice very different from his typical chirpy one. Inko dropped the photos on the table and said, "So, you're saying that Detenarod is supplying Quirk supremacist groups with money and technology to fight heroes?" "I would believe so. Can we?" Inko inquired, hoping that the Hero Commission would conduct a small-scale raid on Deka City to stop the resurgent MLA. "No," Nezu said, seemingly reading her thoughts and squelching any glimmer of hope she might have had. "Detenarod is a support company that is worth trillions of yen and with a fortune worth of investment in foreign countries such as China and the United States. Attacking them with a head-front strategy would put Japan's economy into jeopardy, and we may be risking the ire of the foreign countries by crippling Detenarod." Inko said, "So, what can we do?" "There's nothing we can do now except gather a war council and keep our spies in Deka on the low," Nezu replied with solemnity. "You know, it's cracks like this in Quirk laws that allowed organizations like this to form in the first place. Back when I was in America, everyone could use their Quirk as they pleased just as long as they don't hurt anyone with it or use it for vigilantism." Inko cracked up in response to Nezu's solemn. "That is exactly why taking down the commission is next on my list right after the MLA, but regardless, it is only going to get harder going forward." Through curiosity, Inko asked, "Why do you say so?" "Their ideals. If they are a Quirk supremacist group whose goal is to overthrow the government and authorize free Quirk usage and nothing more, then they'd be much easier to deal with, but if they are a group charismatic enough to draw large amounts of people to their side while preaching about the shortcomings of the government." Nezu returned to the subject to allow Inko to process. "It would plunge the country into a civil war which it is not ready for, while putting whoever comes out on top with an undesirable outcome. Either way, We can't let Japan plunge into another civil war. It would not be good for the overall stability of Japan in the long term. They were silent for a while before Inko made the decision to speak once more. Inko smiled her signature smile and said, "Anyway, moving on from that topic, I want to tell you that after this year I'd be resigning." "You'll what?" Nezu inquired, taken aback by this disclosure. "I'll be resigning. My work schedule has grown too busy for poor Nita to handle." Nezu put on his signature smile once more and remarked, "Well, this is certainly shocking news, but I suppose it can't be helped." Nezu asked out loud, "How did you even manage your lofty schedules?" "I guess having a good PA helped with that, and also but going on trips overseas with no fee charged while also having a profitable salary may have something to do with her agreeing to handle meetings on my behalf, but my schedule has become very hectic lately." "Well then, at least you told me ahead of time, so by the time comes you'd submit your resignation letter to me as well as announce your resignation to the students." Inko stood up and started to leave, saying, "Well, that seems simple enough, but if you'll excuse me now I would like to take my leave." After saying, "Of course you can leave," Inko went to the door, opened it, and left. Nezu returned to his paperwork after she left, letting out a long sigh as he did so. Before she made the decision to speak, Kendo and Izuku were standing outside the fake building, Kendo trying to commit the building's blueprints to memory and Izuku inserting the ear-comm device into his ear. Without even trying to hide her disapproval of Bakugo's actions, Kendo memorized the building's blueprints and asked, "So, what's your business with explosive ass?" "Explosive ass?" Izuku asked, startled by the moniker, and Kendo just shrugged before responding. We were friends," Izuku stated. With her mouth agape like a fish, Kendo exclaimed, "You were friends with that guy? I mean, that would explain why he calls you Deku and all, but what have you done to him that he despises you so much?" Izuku said thoughtfully, "I think there is some perceived inferiority complex, but we can still make this work in our favor. Bakugo hates my guts and I am 100% sure he'd abandon the objective in a heartbeat just to pursue his vendetta with me." "You have a plan, then?" Kendo smirked as she asked, her lips moving upward. "Yes. However, before I begin, tell me more about your peculiarity." "I'll show him. I'll be number one. So, that useless Deku thinks he can beat me, because of his shitty-ass quirk? That bastard thinks he can look down on me. So, are you planning anything?" Lita inquired as she examined the bomb. "Yes, I do have a plan. That snotty nerd will have to learn his place from me. Please don't get in my way." "I don't care what you do," Bakugo growled at the unfortunate Lita. "Bakugo-san. That isn't a plan. Midoriya-san and Kendo-san will outsmart us if we don't have one." Naturally, Bakugo ignored Ida's tirade about karate chopping the air because he was determined to defeat Izuku. Lita was worriedly observing Katsuki's angry face during his internal monologue, but he chose to ignore it in favor of moving the bomb. Bakugo plugged in his earpiece and used explosions to launch himself towards the entrance as soon as All Might announced the start, disregarding what his teammate did. Lita simply worriedly looked after him before letting his fate play out. Izuku was at the end of a long hallway, standing with his hands in his pockets. Bakugo was now walking, having determined that his best option was to conserve strength. He had searched 3 stories so far, but had found no sign of Deku, and it was beginning to irritate him. He was always prepared to blast something or someone on his way. "You're after me, just like I said. King Explosion Murder, you took less time than I anticipated, so I must congratulate you." He wasted no time in answering, instead choosing to charge full scale. Izuku's face stayed the same, but Katsuki saw the look on his face, something that only a close acquaintance could see, which was one of pure, unabashed smugness, as if everything had gone as planned. Katsuki feinted, first with a right hook, then with a left, but Izuku was already out of the way, throwing a shoulder. "I have to say, Katsuki, you surprised me. Typically, you begin with a right. You wanted to surprise me, didn't you?" Bakugo, flushed, wanted nothing more than to beat the living daylights out of Deku. "Stop talking, you blinded bastard!" He yelled and detonated an explosion in the vicinity of Izuku's face, but regrettably, just like the previous times, he was not struck by the blasts. Bakugo muttered mainly to himself, "It just doesn't make sense. Is Deku stronger than me? That simply isn't feasible." Still with some combat sense, Bakugo knew his explosions wouldn't hit Izuku, so he put some distance and kept firing from a distance in the hopes of overwhelming him. However, Izuku plowed through the explosions and punched him in the gut, causing him to double over in agony and send spittle flying out of his mouth as he barely stopped his soul from being ejected from his body. Bakugo had to retreat while holding his stomach because he couldn't withstand that kind of blow again. Damn it. How is he so fucking strong? And fast? How is he better than me? Katsuki had to consider his options, but then he got a signal that his gauntlets had finished charging, and a smile appeared on his face. He had just received a transformative moment. All right, you shit-faced Deku. Do you believe that your shitty barrier has made you some hot shit? It should be able to survive this. In order to gain some distance, he leapt back and got ready to pull the pin. Young Bakugo, stop this right now. He might die from this. Through his earpiece, All Might spoke. If he moves, no, he smiled and pulled the pin. Even though Katsuki was squinting, he could see that Izuku had no intention of avoiding the massive explosion that rocked the entire building, which caused Bakugo to reconsider the situation. Young Bakugo, you will fail the exercise if you use an attack of that magnitude once more. Bakugo shouted loudly through the ear comms as All Might scolded him. Izuku stood there looking indifferent, but he was secretly irritated. He could have confronted Bakugo's massive explosions, but that would only lower his grade, so he chose to do the most sensible thing, which was to reduce the explosions. A blue ball of energy appeared on the tip of Izuku's finger, swirling, compressing into itself, into a void of nothingness, and then Izuku raised his hands, and a faint blue energy enveloped them before he clenched them into a fist, except for his first finger. Blue is the technique amplification lapse. Izuku's quirk created a void in space in response to his whisper, and reality had to correct itself by drawing in all of the surrounding matter. He had countered Bakugo's mega explosion, leaving the boy completely stunned as he stood there, despite the fact that the entire hallway was badly burned and almost everything was covered in soot and dust. All of Bakugo's fiery explosions diminished in size and intensity as Izuku's sphere absorbed them, growing to the size of a baseball before Izuku paused to look around. Is it all you have to offer me? Bakugo's eyes bulged in disbelief at Izuku's words. But as the smoke dispersed, there he was. Standing, with his arms in his pockets and no trace of an explosion where he stood. Katsuki was too shocked to even register the capture tape wrapping around him. But it is hard to ignore All Might, especially when he's screaming into your earpiece. Both villains are captured, the hero team winning. Bakugo was startled out of his daze by that. You played with me all along, didn't you? Izuku said nothing, but it was enough to make Katsuki angry. He should have won, he should have killed the snotty nerd, but if Deku was really stronger than him, there was only one thing left to do. You bastard. Simply put, this is a fluke. I really am the best. I will always be far superior to you, regardless of how hard you train Deku. Do you hear me? It is not important, because I will always be above you, no matter how high you climb. And I'll ascend even higher than you can. Deku, do you hear me? But as Katsuki turned to face his new rival, he was ignoring it and turning to leave. Stop ignoring me, asshole. Bakugo let out a shriek and immediately succumbed to the bliss of unconsciousness. What the devil happened down here, Midoriya? As she ran to meet Izuku, Kendo's voice yelled from the hallway, halting and standing over Bakugo's captured form. Kendo? I thought you were looking for the bomb, he said, bewildered. When she felt that huge explosion, she thought frantically, I already captured the bomb and I figured you might need help. Well, you arrived just in time. Izuku grinned at Bakugo's unconscious body on the ground and explained, everything on my end went according to plan. I assume my plan was a complete success? Izuku inquired. Yeah, but I was only that fast in defeating Lita because... Flashback. Just a short while ago Iida, who had given up on talking to Bakugo, stood praising the bomb's texture and glaring at Bakugo's actions while keeping a close eye out for any movement. What a mouthy miscreant, he expects me to protect the bomb alone after refusing to collaborate with me. And now because of Midoriya-san our chances of success are low, Lita concluded, taking a deep breath to re-energize himself. If Midoriya-san comes here I cannot get past his infinity nor can I defend and attack at the same time. Lita raged, unaware that Kendo was listening to him from behind a pillar. Tenya Lita, the future inventor and heir to the Lita family, shouldn't be seen sulking over a disobedient teammate. I'll go above and beyond to conquer every challenge. Iida hummed thoughtfully, maybe I should embrace my villainous side, they were supposed to be horrible villains, right? All right. I have to accept my inner villain. Indeed. I will be. The height of evil. Bawahahaha. PFFFT. Iida, red under his helmet from embarrassment, snapped his head in the direction of the entrance, forgetting to maintain eye contact. Who visits that place? Show yourself. Kendo moved from behind a pillar, suppressing her laughter. Dude, we all know it's you, there's no need to put on that cringe act of villainy, Kendo choked out in between chuckles. Stop giggling. I am malevolent, Iida persisted. Maybe he had to do something only a villain would do, but what? Oh, right, it was time for a monologue. He could get some time if he did that, right? Ha ha. Laugh to your heart's content, hero, but you won't stop me. Kendo appeared to roll her eyes and laugh at that. Iida felt an eyebrow twitch. I have prepared myself for this very encounter, you see. Anything that might have worked against me has been eliminated. Additionally, this room was picked with purpose to allow me the most mobility possible, Iida boasted. Fortunately, Kendo just stood there and watched. Iida arched an eyebrow, asking why she wasn't rushing at him. It all appeared to be a distraction. He cautiously paced the room, peering behind the pillars of a stark, gray room. Where is Midoriya? He pondered. He is distracting Bakugo, Kendo said naively. Kendo jumped at him before Lita could continue her monologue, enlarging her fists 3 times her body size before doing a backflip in midair. As Lita was about to carry the bomb away laughing, the building was rocked by what sounded like a giant earthquake, and Kendo fell with a loud thud. However, Lita was on the ground when it happened, and she was shaken and fell to the ground, apparently in a daze, leaving the bomb unguarded. This was Kendo's cue to wrap the capture tape around his legs. Through the communications, All Might's voice echoed, both villains are captured, the hero team winning. After approaching Lita, Kendo offered him a hand, which he gratefully accepted. Nice showing, to be honest, though, you were given the short straw in terms of partners today. You two had a nice showing, Kendo-san. If not for that mini earthquake I would not have been bested so easily. But I swear that I will beat you in a real fight the next time, Iida declared to Kendo, who simply stood there expressionless. She jogged off after saying, sure, but don't complain when I kick your butt, as Lita stood there muttering to himself. The end of the flashback. The rest of the class was left to figure out what they had just witnessed. The blindfolded guy had just beaten the living daylights out of the explosive jerk, and the explosive jerk might have attempted to kill the other, and the winner was still the blindfolded guy. All Might snapped out of it and sprang into action, jumping out of the room and toward the building to pick up Bakugo. The control room was silent, and the entire class, including the teacher, could only stare at the screen, mouths open. Oh my god. Crap, Class 1A was in complete uproar over the outcome of the first battle trial. Tears of excitement leaped out from Kaminari's eyes. He beat him, he really beat him. That was absolutely amazing, Mina exclaimed. Guess which student said this? It was absolutely dazzling. Most impressive, Tokiyami concluded. Is this man even comparable to us? Kami asked, her tone showing shock. As Kendo described what transpired between her and Lita, Izuku made her way back to the observation room. So I wrapped him in capture tape after he fell and waited for a minute or two. The exercise was then declared to be over by All Might. Kendo concluded her account just as they were returning to the observation room. After sending Bakugo to the nurse, All Might decided to interrupt the lively Class 1A to ask their thoughts on what they had just witnessed. He intended to give Bakugo a very severe lecture and punishment when he regained consciousness. Can someone now tell me who this bottle's MVP was? The first person to raise her hand was Yaoyorozu. Obviously, that would be Midoriya. He created the ideal strategy by applying his understanding of his opponent's character and peculiarity. He was aware that Bakugo would pursue him, but Lita would be more sensible and defend the bomb. Knowing that his quirk could get past his trap, he came up with a straightforward strategy that was sufficient to surprise his adversary. Additionally, he diverted Bakugo's attention during their battle so that his partner could incapacitate Lita, despite the fact that it was an unusual tactic. Since Izuku was the one who came up with the entire plan that guaranteed Bakugo and Lita's defeat, almost every member of Class 1A supported Momo. All Might, meanwhile, started to perspire. How intelligent are these kids? She said even more than I had intended to say. But as Momo blushed shyly, he praised her observational skills aloud and sent the next group, while the others got ready to watch their battle. With a sigh of disappointment, All Might began, although, young Midoriya, why is your quirk registry so uninformed? It is incredibly dishonorable that you risked getting into a fight with your classmates, prepared to use your quirk against them, without even giving the faculty enough notice. I have to evaluate the possible risks for such delicate exercises in my capacity as a teacher. Izuku was aware of the reason his quirk registry was as ambiguous as possible, listing only space manipulation and providing minimal information so that anyone viewing it could speculate and determine the full scope of his quirk. However, you could have stopped the fight before it started if your quirk is what I believe it to be. Why did you decide to use your quirk as sparingly as possible to drag it out? All Might completed his evaluation before turning to the observation screen. As a result of this, I would deduct points from you, not enough to fail but to serve as a warning for next time. However, All Might's criticism that the fight was drawn out was entirely accurate. Instead of using Lapse Blue to draw Bakugo closer to him before knocking him out, he simply allowed the fight to escalate to that point for no apparent reason. Taking All Might's criticism to heart, Izuku sighed. "Izuku, you did a great job, but we just need to learn from our mistakes," Momo said as she approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's the main reason we're here." Izuku managed only to say, "Thanks, Momo," before focusing on the observation screen. Bakugo felt completely worthless. His body hurt like hell and he had a terrible headache, but his pride was the true victim. Before being paraded through the public square for the shits and giggles, his pride had been battered, flogged, and covered in feces and shit. That is to say, he was not feeling well, either emotionally or physically. He had been utterly humiliated during Deku's battle trial. When Deku was using his quirk, he was unable to strike him once. Even without his quirk, Deku easily countered his attack and put him on his ass once more. Deku made it appear effortless as he danced around him and put him in his proper place. His final remarks implied that he was merely a warm-up, which fucking hurt. Over the previous 5 years, Deku not only outperformed him, but he wasn't even second to the fuckhead. Who knew exactly what big tits were capable of when things got serious? He wasn't even certain if he was third. His hand went up to hold his stomach as he winced. He had the worst stomachache he had ever had, but he had no idea what the hell had hit him. On top of the day's horseshit Sunday, it was the maraschino cherry. The voice of an elderly woman piped up next to his bed and asked, "How's your gut, young man?" The words, "It feels like shit," he whispered. She said, "I'm not surprised," Recovery Girl sarcastically said. "Getting the equivalent of a golf ball slammed into your gut will do that to you." Recalling the beating he had endured at Deku's hands, he snarled. She reprimanded him, "You don't get to be bitter, boy," and then she walked away and settled into her seat. Bakugo's eyes widened slightly in shock as she said, "Just look at what you did to the training ground today." She then displayed a photo of a badly burned hallway on her computer. "I'd have ripped you a new one for your comical level of recklessness that could have gotten yourself and others killed or seriously hurt, but someone else is waiting outside to speak to you first, and anything I say would either be redundant or much nicer than what you're about to get," Recovery Girl grumbled as she returned to the monitor. To no one in particular, he muttered in a low voice, "Who the hell wants to talk to me?" A voice called behind him, "I do," and he turned to see All Might, in all his bravery, staring down at him with a literal expression on his face that was devoid of a smile. All Might turned to Bakugo very slowly, then spoke in a harsh voice that betrayed barely contained rage. "Now, young Bakugo," All Might uttered after inhaling deeply. Bakugo sneered, yeah, I screw up. I know what I did wrong." With an eyebrow raised, All Might questioned, "Do you now?" "I'm listening." Bakugo said nothing. Bakugo looked at the man anxiously as All Might's normally open tone took a horrifyingly harsh turn when he said, "Then allow me to list your many failures in this exercise. First, you didn't just ignore a teammate, you abandoned him outright, refusing to listen to his many pleas for cooperation. And even when you were backed into a corner, you avoided any attempts at communication with young Iida. What would have happened had you missed the hero team altogether? Would you have been wandering around or waiting for them to casually pass by you?" Bakugo frowned and didn't say anything. "Second, in your arrogance, you severely underestimated your opponents. Worse yet, you lost sight of your mission due to some sense of personal vendetta or battle lust. Young Midoriya played you like a fiddle. Once he used his quirk, the battle was put to rest. I do not know what you wanted to prove, but battles aren't always won by brutality alone." Bakugo clenched his fists in rage and hissed, exposing his teeth, but his head remained lowered. Bakugo merely grimaced at the recollection, saying, "Thirdly, I am appalled at your lack of restraint. I did not miss the fact you aimed straight to young Midoriya's head in your initial engagement. Had young Midoriya not acted in time, I fear what might have happened." Bakugo growled, "I wasn't going to kill him, no, but such a strong explosion, to the face and at such close range, could have given him a concussion, at the very least, and a broken neck or a scar to the face at worst. As miraculous as Recovery Girl's quirk is, that does not excuse such apathy towards your classmate's health. I must say, I never expected to witness such violence as you displayed against young Midoriya," All Might said. All Might glared at the eruptive teenager, saying, "You had multiple opportunities to plan and use your quirk to its fullest potential, but instead, you chose to use it to inflict damage. That is truly reprehensible. However, the boy chose to keep his hands in his pockets and snarl at the ground. Bakugo was on the verge of blowing up, despite his best efforts to project a contemptuous air. Because the building wasn't brought down by the explosion and no one was ultimately hurt, and the rest of the class was able to continue, just in a different building. That was your only saving grace, but you still knowingly tried to commit grievous bodily harm on fellow students during a training exercise, successful or not. This conversation is only happening right now because of Midoriya sensibly deciding to reduce the damage caused by your cataclysmic explosion, and the fact that this is your first training exercise just saved you from a one-way ticket to the villain rehabilitation program at Ketsubutsu Academy. The only thing he could reply was, "Oh, and from now on you'll be sitting out every heroics class until the sports festival at the bare minimum, and you'll be on a probationary period for the rest of the semester in which you will be seeing Hound Dog for compulsory therapy, likely for the foreseeable future. If you do something like this again, even the slightest misstep, and you'll be lucky to land in general studies." Bakugo's punishment in the Antarctic glare he was getting caused his stomach to drop to the bottom of his sphincter. A hero, no matter how powerful, should always think of how best to use their powers to save people, All Might reminded him after concluding his tirade. After giving him a final stern look, All Might departed, leaving Bakugo to consider his options. Izuku moved through the UA hallways while humming an unidentified song. Effortlessly, and he recited in his mind what he had already learned about his classmates. Lida acted like he had a giant stick up his ass. No surprise there, Kirishima was constantly talking about his manly nonsense and also didn't understand what personal space was. Mina was too happy and didn't understand it. Kami went out of her way to speak in that ridiculous teenage accent, and Katsuki was just Katsuki. Izuku would have laughed in his face if someone had told him that he would have such a negative opinion of his classmates roughly 6 years ago. He was, after all, the same person who was able to keep toxic people like Bakugo by his side. However, as his mother's wealth increased over the years, he met a lot of people who wanted to be friends with him only because he was rich, attractive, or because they wanted to worship and decried him. As a result, they became disgusted and cut off friendships, and at one point in his life, Izuku could say he was much colder than Shoto ever could have been. His social skills only recently began to improve because of his mother, and even then, he occasionally lost control and would aloofly ignore or dismiss his classmates. One of the best examples is his initial exchange with Uraraka. And that constituted a significant factor in his friendship with Momo. In addition to being attractive, she also lacked any tics that would turn someone off. She also didn't have the typical snobbish, stuck-up attitude you'd expect from someone of her caliber, even though she came from a wealthy family. Their shared background, both of them wanting people to like them for who they are, not what they have, made them instantly friends, as well as the fact that she was intelligent and attractive. He shook himself from his thoughts, readjusting his blindfold as he started to recall what had transpired at the gate. Izuku, however, was by no means a person who was easily agitated. Katsuki could hardly claim that his antics were more than a minor annoyance. He detested being the center of attention, though. Preying on All Might in front of the UA, he also took the brunt of the reporter's attention because he always made it a point to be early. Entrance. Inquiries concerning All Might's instructional strategies and other unrelated topics bombarded him. He quickly regained their trust by claiming to be from General Ed, and they left him as if he were contagious. In the UA, it was a fresh and new day, and Aizawa appeared just as worn out and sullen as ever. Was he even asleep? Having been traumatized on the first day, the students watched in silence as their teacher started the day. But instead of saying anything, the man paused to examine each one of them closely. A significant event was about to occur. The pupils swallowed. Did their performance the previous day have anything to do with it? They looked at one another and were glad they weren't going through this alone. Kaminari and Mineta appeared on the verge of a panic attack. Uraraka's fingernails were bitten. Iida and Yaoyorozu tried to maintain their composure as they gazed at their teacher. Izuku simply maintained a neutral expression, though occasionally it was difficult to tell what he was thinking because of his blindfold. Everyone held their breath in anticipation. Would anyone be kicked out? Did he think any of them were not worthy of going on? They were going crazy from the suspense? Aizawa yawned and finally said, "Morning everyone." He trailed off, squinting at his students and drawing their anxious attention to him. "I went over the footage of yesterday's battle trial. Allow me to say," he said. "You all did well," he concluded in his typically slack voice. Class 1A gazed at their homeroom teacher in blankness. Did they? They all thought at the same time. To be honest, they had anticipated some more abrasive remarks than that. "It was your first attempt at a hero-villain battle," So I can't say I had any expectations to begin with, Aizawa chuckled. Otherwise I would have expelled half of you based on yesterday's ridiculous displays of stupidity, negligence, arrogance, and sheer irrationality while sending the rest to general studies. The students stopped sweating. They had learned to know that Aizawa now. He leaned forward and squinted at them, saying, I have a few pointers for each of you, but that will have to wait. There is something of utmost importance to do first. His tone became almost menacing. Something that will affect your future in UA while you don't fail to meet my expectations. Oh no. This is awful, almost every student chortled in their minds. What might it be? A dismissal. One more test, please, don't give me another test. Aizawa told them, you must choose a class representative and vice representative. Puzzled, everyone looked at their homeroom teacher. Is that all? God damn it, he had to make it so tense, but why? I don't care how you do it, just get it done before your first class. Aizawa said. After giving a yawn, he said, with that said, I'll go to sleep. He got up and unfolded a sleeping bag he had hidden beneath the instructor's desk. What his students were seeing was unbelievable. Meanwhile, Izuku scowled and began to reflect. He considered their options while ignoring his classmates' animated antics. Kyoka said, so how will we decide? Voting. Bakugo stood on his desk and shouted, forget it, extras, while making little explosions. I declare myself class representative. Bakugo abruptly returned to pouting in his seat as Asui said, but we barely know each other, ribbit. For roughly 30 seconds, Izuku listened to his class as a whole try to decide how to choose a representative before his mind turned to other things. For Bakugo to be so obedient, whatever shit he had predicted he would be in must have been pretty bad. If he was telling the truth, it was rather unsettling. With hesitation, Sato added, I don't know. I think we know enough of everyone, right? Yaoyorozu sounded unsure as he asked hesitantly, does anyone know what are the responsibilities involved with being class representative? Kirishima said, I don't know, but it sounds really manly. But he scratched his head and scowled. Eh? Does they even do anything or is it just some title? The grape-haired boy Mineta said, in my administration girls would have to show at least 30 centimeters of thigh. But everyone else ignored him, with the exception of a few girls who gave him a quizzical and disgusted look. I think he or she has to deal with any events, help organize stuff, and, other stuff, I think. Never had one in my middle school, replied Zero. Ashido yelled, it sounds fun, pick me, and the class broke up into an indiscernible argument. Izuku was brought back to reality by Mina's happy antics when he saw Lita get up from his chair, march to the front of the class in his usual manner, and slam his hands on Aizawa's table to get their attention. Before his eyes fell on Lita, who gave him a shy look, Aizawa woke up from his sleeping bag to see who had woken him up. Aizawa gave him a look that threatened to cause him pain if he woke up again, and Lita shrank under his deadly intent gaze before abruptly averting his eyes and going back to his sleeping bag. As a premier school, I expect us to handle things like this in a more simple and civilized way, which is why I propose the notion of voting for your candidates, Iida said, turning back to his classmates, as the class silenced itself and started to murmur. Itsuka questioned, but won't everybody just vote themselves? Probably, Iida shrugged and went on, which is why the class representative would be the person with the most votes, and the assistant would be the person who came in second. Jiro shrugged, sounds good to me, he said. Papers were soon disturbed, and a ballot box was set up where voters could write the name of their preferred candidate and then put it in the box. A slip of paper on his desk caught his attention again, and he realized that they must have been voting for class representative. It was an odd method of choosing a representative, since most of the students hardly knew one another, so he assumed that the winner would be the person who received the most votes, which would be around 2 or 3. It made no difference to him. But it did take him a while to choose his candidate. Iida was the first person that came to mind because he seemed to be the most enthusiastic about the job and would undoubtedly take it the most seriously of all the people there, including himself. But perhaps that's precisely the problem. He took everyday things far too seriously, which turned off a lot of people. He couldn't think of anything wrong with his next thought, which was Momo. She was incredibly intelligent and most likely the class's most responsible member. She would most likely end up as vice representative and still be a tremendous asset to the position even if she wasn't chosen to be class representative. After inserting a pin, he continued. Even though he didn't know Kendo well, he could tell that she behaved like a big sister to the class and would make a fantastic class representative because of her ability to get along with people without coming across as distant or foolish. But his knowledge of Momo forced him to draw a hasty conclusion. Ochako was vivacious and gave off the impression that she wouldn't let anything, no matter how awful, ruin her day. However, she would be the first to acknowledge that she wasn't particularly interested in being a class representative, and she would likely punch anyone who voted for her. Although Shoji was cool, he didn't believe the taller boy would want the job because of his distant manner. Kami wasn't an option because he was sure she would OMG any problem that was put to her. Shoto. As he heard the bi-colored boy murmur to himself, "What a waste of time," immediately putting that thought aside, Izuku wrote Momo's name on the ballot and put it in the box. Iida went to the board to count the votes after they were all cast. As he had anticipated, Momo's name received 5 tallies fairly early on. He wrote it off because he thought Kendo's name would be tallied. He wasn't overly worried when she got another one. She then received a third, followed by a fourth. She was up to 9 pretty quickly. "What the fuck?" Izuku heard her murmur absently. With 14 votes, Kendo ultimately took the lead. Lita received 1 vote, while Momo was in second place with 5. Kendo and Izuku were left stunned, and she stayed stunned even after Aizawa affirmed the choice, and the remainder of the day went on normally. In the meantime, Lita, who appeared to be suffering from severe constipation, congratulated Kendo before returning to his seat in silence. Sadly, Lita. Kendo maintained an extremely contemplative expression for the remainder of the day. Everyone was congratulating her on her position, which she didn't even want, and it seemed like even the teachers were just asking her questions, which made her even more irritable. Things for teenagers. She did not have any alone time until lunchtime. However, after Ishido and Yorozu sat down next to her, that was a waste of time. He sat down across from her after her. Kendo kept eating silently while she described what had happened that day, and to be honest, it felt unsettling even though she wasn't wet behind the ears when it came to such a responsibility. When she noticed Mina using a chopstick to poke her lobster, she snapped out of her reverie. It took only a scathing glare and a slap of her hands away to get the girl off her back. When she looked, Yorozu was there. Yaoyozu. Staring at her with warmth, her name, whatever it was, began with a Y and ended with a U. "Seem to be having a problem, Kendo-san?" "Well, I mean yeah, I just didn't expect to be voted class rep." Momo tried to lift her spirits by saying, "I understand but I feel that you'd be a good one," but Kendo saw right through her. "Are you just saying this to cheer me up? I mean you don't even know me?" "Perhaps, but I know you would be a good class representative because your easygoing aura is enough to handle class representative duties." Kendo gave a snort. "You sound like someone with experience." In an attempt to avoid coming across as conceited, Momo sheepishly responded, "Well, I was class representative throughout my junior high school years." "She's even more experienced in the position than I am." Kendo's eyes were wide as he thought. "Thanks for the talk EHM." Kendo blushed shyly as he looked for answers from a giggling Ishido. "Yaoyorozu," said Momo. "Well, I think that's enough of your class representative bullshit. Like I mean who cares about class representative, I never had one in my middle school," Mina responded with a sigh. "I heard such activities give you leadership experience, Ishido-san." With a mockingly hurt voice, Mina said, "What's with the san? San. I feel like my mom now, Yao Momo." When Momo interrupted, Kendo was about to reprimand her. "What, Yao Momo? Come on Ishido," he said. "It's okay." Kendo saw, Momo said, preventing herself from using the word san once more. "I like the nickname," Momo remarked as she resumed her meal. Mina pouted under Kendo's murderous glare. "Yeah, seriously Yao Momo, your surname is a tongue twister," she said. Momo sighed and said, "It's fine. Yao Momo is fine with me," seemingly not offended by Ishido's remarks. Momo, Kendo, and Ishido kept eating their food without talking to one another until Momo noticed Izuku carrying his tray of food and leaving to sit somewhere else, followed by Uraraka and Lita. He appeared to be making every effort to stay away from them and ignore Lita's tirade, but Uraraka and Lita simply continued to follow him despite the fact that he was moving in a zigzag pattern and didn't want to sit down with them. Based on the small facial expression she could see, he appeared agitated. Whatever Lita was saying seemed to be really getting on his nerves. Momo patted the vacant seat next to her and exclaimed, "Hey, Izuku. Come sit here." He approached Kendo and gave her a brief acknowledgement greeting, to which she replied before taking a seat. When Ochako and Lita simultaneously asked, "Can we sit here?" Momo and Kendo merely waved their hands in agreement. Izuku was seated next to Ochako, while Ishido was seated next to Ilda. Izuku let out a sigh. He was now positioned between two females. Ochako smirked and said, "So, Madam President, who did you vote?" At the nickname, Izuku could almost feel Kendo wince. In a clipped tone, Kendo merely responded, I voted for Midoriya here. Momo's inspirational speech didn't seem to have any impact. Me too. Well, I voted for Iida first, since he seemed right for the job, glasses and all, but in the second vote I decided to go with you since you were the one to devise a plan to capture Lita and Bakugo. That's gotta mean you're smart, right? Replied Uraraka. Iida gave it a weird look before voicing his opinion. While Momo was saying, it's quite unfortunate that you did not win, I was rooting for you, Izuku, she failed to notice that Ochako and Ishido were getting excited when Izuku's first name was used. When Izuku said, that goodness that I didn't win, I hate the role of class representative actually, Kendo and Ochako gasped in surprise. Kendo bowed slightly and said, I sincerely apologize for voting for you. I did not know this made you unhappy. Ochako gave Iida a questioning glance as Izuku waved it away and began eating his fried rice. All but Izuku stared in disbelief as Lita declared, I actually voted for myself, for the first time, but for the second time I voted Yaoyorozu-san. He concluded solemnly, saying, I thought myself perfect for the role, but in middle school, I always lost to Yaoyorozu-san here for some reason. However, almost everyone offered him a blank expression that said, with that giant stick up your ass, it's no wonder you lost to Yaoyorozu. Izuku just kept eating his fried rice while thinking, maybe one day Lita, one day, despite Ochako's attempts to comfort him. Ochako's abrupt question made Iida look a little embarrassed, but Izuku responded on his behalf without even taking his eyes off his fried rice. Iida, the way you talk, are you a rich kid? Kendo gave her a face slap in frustration. Don't you think that some people just said whatever was on their mind? His last name is the same as Hero Ingenium, a pretty famous hero, who operates in Tokyo and employs 65 sidekicks. Both have the same quirk as the past members of the Iida family. Based on his and Ingenium's age, he must be his brother. Am I wrong? Izuku asked with an obvious smirk. Iida had a stunned expression. All of Midoriya's planned remarks and more have just been revealed. Ochako appeared taken aback as well, but she remained silent as she turned to gaze at Lita in awe. Iida opened her mouth to speak, but the screech of an alarm interrupted her. Level 3 security has been breached. All students evacuate in an orderly fashion. Hell erupted. Without paying any attention to the concluding statement, all of the students instantly became terrified. She closed her eyes in fear as Ochako was about to be swarmed over, until someone swung her on their back after touching her palm. She opened her eyes to see Izuku's green hair, which she recognized, still clutching his fried rice. She shouted in his ear, you think that you should be eating right now? In a rare display of emotion, Izuku simply gazed at her with mild agitation. It's a waste of good food, and how do you expect me to eat in all this noise? Yeah, I'd expect these people to act more civilized and rational. They're in Ua, aren't they supposed to be smart? Izuku wisely remarked, a person is smart, people are dumb. A particularly high-pitched screech made both of them shudder. Izuku scowled. Meanwhile, Kendo had had enough. After grabbing Kendo by the waist, Izuku complied and flew across the cafeteria toward the exit. Midoriya-kun. You can fly right. Please get me to the front towards the exit so that we can try to calm down the crowd. Iida was shouting and pointing out the windows as they went by. They were all watching the main yard. They witnessed reporters swarming around President Mike and Eraserhead like vultures, demanding to speak with all might or at the very least obtain a statement. So handsome, Kendo thought dreamily, blushing as she gazed at him, her thoughts clouded by the expensive cologne he wore, which she greedily sniffed. She also thought about how his eyes would appear without his blindfold. Midoriya looked at Kendo, who was blushing as she looked at him, and asked, Are you okay, Kendo? Kendo said, Yay, I'm okay, as she made an effort to look away from his face. Kendo looked around, trying to think of a plan to divert her attention from Midoriya. Damn it, it's just the press, she said. She simply made the decision to be straightforward. She screamed as loudly as she could when he dropped her off above the entrance. Ochako and the others turned to face her after hearing her raise her voice and then noticing the words she used. Everyone, shut the fuck up and get your shit together, she continued once she had everyone's attention. Students looked around, some feeling guilty, some embarrassed, but all ready to assist, not even caring that their junior was reprimanding them. It is just the press. We're UA students, for God's sake, so let's act like we belong here, they exclaimed. While the others were evacuated, they worked together to get the injured students to recovery girls. However, Nezu and a few other teachers looked at their UA, while Midoriya and Kendo took charge of the cafeteria situation. Barrier disintegrated into a dusty heap. Who do you believe was capable of doing this? Knowing it couldn't have been one of the reporters, Snipe asked. Nezu said, I don't know, adding that it was either a villain or a hoodlum, but in any case, this should serve as a warning to all of us to strengthen our security. Still, I'm concerned about what it might mean. Is it a straightforward act of violence, or a war declaration? Everyone was troubled by what he said, and the police came to remove the press from the campus. Izuku's only issue after class was that he kept looking at Midnight, because he had appreciated her so much. Thank God he always covered his eyes. Other boys had similar issues, and only Mineta declared modern hero art history his favorite subject. What made it worse was Midnight's knowing glint as she stared at them, which gave Izuku the impression that she knew a lot more. After the regular classes, which left many of the boys with severe nosebleeds, Aizawa entered the room and started talking to them, either not knowing about their issue or not caring, though I knew Aizawa. What happens when people follow their instincts is what you witnessed today. People go into a panic. As the heroes of the future, you must learn to control your panic and respond appropriately to the circumstances. Well done, Kendo. The student with the orange hair turned to face their instructor. You handled the situation and responded effectively. Well done. Although there was some embarrassment in her eyes, Kendo nodded and maintained an emotionless expression despite the praise she received. But next time, watch the language. It's time for you to leave now, but I did say I had some advice for you earlier, so please meet me in the teacher's lounge. Kendo, Midoriya, Lita, and Bakugo first. Students, keep in mind that we have a special class tomorrow afternoon. Dismissed. Please, sit. Is what Aizawa said. With a gulp, Midoriya and Kendo looked around. They were sitting on opposite sofas in a side room. Where exactly were they? Kendo tentatively looked around the room and noticed Izuku sitting with his arms folded and his legs crossed, his face expressionless. Bakugo and Lita waited patiently outside with Aizawa for their turn. With a weary sigh, Aizawa leaned back and held a mug of steaming coffee in one hand while he said, Let me just say, you truly are a problem child. Midoriya and Kendo did not notice the files on his lap. Tell me, Midoriya, why didn't you update your quirk registry? Being vague is different from being up to date, sir, Izuku stated, maintaining a neutral expression. And may I know the reason why your quirk details are so vague, Aizawa said, sounding slightly irritated and clipped. I'm still discovering the full extent of my quirk, sir, and once I do I will put more details in my registry. Do it, please. Aizawa's voice was unusually serious as he stated, the last thing we need is an unpredictable wildcard among us whose quirk could be a danger to all of us. With I will, sir, Izuku answered. Anyway, to get to the main issue, which was your team's abysmal performance, which was slightly better than Bakugo's team. Aizawa said, First of all, Midoriya, you should have taken the shot when you had the chance, as a sinister grin appeared on his face. The Izuku in question just cast a shamed glance down. After a full minute of silently staring at Midoriya and Kendo, Aizawa spoke once more. It's obvious that Pomeranian here harbors resentment toward you, whether the other students are aware of this or not. Prior to the start of the game. Isn't Midoriya there the best person to know that? Yes, but what? That doesn't. A villain with a grudge against you was going to target you, and you knew that from the start. However, I have to give you full credit for facing him rather than fleeing. Why did you decide to taunt him rather than put an end to it as quickly as possible? I witnessed the power of your quirk, and I am aware that you had the opportunity to effectively end the altercation before it started. Your actions further inflamed his rage and frustration. Let's not even discuss the potential for civilians to become entangled in the villain's pursuit. Izuku flinched abruptly. The instant you lose sight of such a destructive villain, you endanger everyone in your vicinity, including heroes and civilians. The right thing to do would have been to lure and capture. Luring him away, either to a place where you can exploit the terrain or somewhere safe, preferably up. Given that he uses explosives, is preferable to taunting him and allowing him to carelessly attack his surroundings in order to hit you. Aizawa concluded his tirade by rubbing his temples in frustration, and seeing the damage caused by Bakugo, it very well could have been a catastrophe had it not been a training exercise, he said. And you, Kendo, please be more serious about these kinds of exercises. The only way Team A could have prevailed was by ambushing the villains, as Iida had no intention of leaving the bomb alone and your quirk only works at close range. The instant Kendo's presence was noticed, that match could have been decided. Additionally, your team's communication was a mess. Iida didn't know if Bakugo was holding back both heroes or if it was just Midoriya. It was a big mistake on her part to reveal her location. Having said that, I anticipate that these shortcomings will be addressed over time by future heroes, Dismissed. Kendo and Midoriya both got up and thanked Aizawa before heading out, only to see Bakugo and Lita waiting outside. Izuku briefly met Bakugo's eyes before turning away, to which Bakugo merely sighed. Since school was cancelled for the remainder of the day, all of the students started to commute home or went to hang out with their friends. Ochako and Tenya met on the way home and made an unsuccessful attempt to locate Izuku, assuming that Bakugo should know where he went because they appeared to know each other well. It was easy to find the explosive teenager. All they had to do was listen for insults and profanity, and there he was, already appearing ready to kill someone. Talking to him, though. "What the devil do you want? 4 eyes, round face?" he questioned them. "We wanted to know if you knew Midoriya's location," Uraraka hurriedly inquired before Ida could address Bakugo's tone. "Do I have the appearance of Deku's bodyguard?" Bakugo inquired in a frustrated manner. "No, that was merely a supplementary inquiry. Would you like to spend the weekend with all of us, by the way?" Lita inquired, already waiting for a response. "I have tasks to complete." Bakugo responded, "Ain't got time for stupid shit like that," and then he turned back to glare at them before turning to leave, his hands in his pockets. "Oh, and please don't come ask me questions about Deku the next time. I wouldn't know a thing about that nerd because I haven't spent any time with him since I was 5. Ochako tried not to show her disappointment, but Iida knew better. "Our moms meet sometimes, but that's it," he said, leaving them in an empty hallway. The silence was broken by Ochako's statement, "That was honestly better than I thought." Across the bar counter from him sat a young man with disheveled ashy white hair who drank what looked like liquor down in one shot, all too content with whatever he was doing. In a distant, isolated bar, a strange man who seemed to be made of black mist worked diligently, cleaning glass after glass, as if it were the only thing he did during the day. Suddenly, a beep sounded, and the young man and the bartender looked to one side, where a tiny screen indicated that they were getting a call. "Master," the young man and bartender echoed. "How are things going, Kurogiri and Tamura?" From the other end, a cool, collected voice said. "Great job, Master," Tamura Shigaraki said. "I just need a bit more time," as he sipped his drink and grinned at the computer screen. "But that's to be expected, isn't it?" Thoughtful humming came from the man on the other end. "Tamura, tomorrow is going to be crucial to your plan. The future will be decided by it," the voice said icily. "Master, everything is set up. In order to strengthen our ranks of expendables, Overhaul and his group of Yakuza have consented to work covertly with us, providing us with goons and trigger in return for cash. Jiren has ordered weapons and senior minions to be delivered the following week." With a broad smile, Shigaraki assured him, "Master, I won't let you down. Regardless of how well prepared you are, never undervalue a hero's ability to thwart your plans. Do not fear failure, Tamura," the voice said softly. "Gain knowledge and develop as a result of this experience." Shigaraki just muttered to himself. The man said in a comforting tone, "I am proud of what you have done so far, Tamura. You have developed into a very capable person." "Master, just wait." Tamura's grin widened even more as he said, "I will return you to your former glory once I kill All Might." Humming, "We'll see about that," the man said. Suddenly the line was severed, and Shigaraki was separated from his master, a young villain who appeared unhappy at what he perceived to be a lack of confidence in his skills. Kurogiri comforted Shigaraki, saying, "The master is proud and pleased." Shigaraki said, "Oh, he will be even more soon enough," with a crazy smile on his face. Kurogiri simply nodded and resumed his glass cleaning duties as any other bartender would, while Shigaraki rose from his stool and began humming a cheerful tune. Kurogiri stopped his work and turned to face the young man who was leaving. "Shigaraki, will you spend the remainder of the day playing games in your room?" Kurogiri inquired courteously. "Kurogiri, what do you mean? A stupid computer or console game won't do right now," Shigaraki said, turning around to flash that mad, eerie smile. Shigaraki let out an exuberant cackle for whatever reason. A much bigger game is about to start.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.